What if the stones could remember? Not just the weight of empires or the dust of kings, but the footsteps of those who were never meant to fall. The wind still carries it faintly through the ruins of forgotten lands. A song older than any scripture, sung by the bones of mountains and the tongues of rivers. There was a time when the earth trembled, not in fear, but in reverence. When thrones stood not of gold, but of living stone, carved by hands so vast that valleys hid beneath their fingers. The giants, the Nephilim, they called them in hushed tones. But in the first dawns they had no names, only silence and the soft breath of God upon their brow. They were not born, they were remembered into being, the children of watchful stars walking upon a trembling earth. And when they sat upon their thrones, the stones themselves began to whisper, in languages too deep for the waking world to hold. But every echo fades, every throne gathers dust, and even the greatest giants must listen one day to the silence that follows their own voice. So listen now as the night unfolds. For in the heart of these stones lie stories that have not been spoken aloud since the rivers were young. Stories of the watchers, the fall, the flood, and the long silence that still hums beneath the soil. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. Before the first rebellion, before the first shadows stirred beneath the wings of the divine, there was silence. Not the kind that ends in sound, but the kind that was older than time, vast, eternal, infinite. The heavens shimmered in stillness, veiled in unspoken reverence. The angels moved like breath, woven in harmony with light itself. There was no sorrow then, no longing, no distance between command and obedience. Every word of the eternal was a river of fire, and they drank from it without thirst. But in that still perfection, something began to ache, not in defiance, but in wonder. A thought, small, trembling, flickered in the heart of one watcher who stood too long between heaven and earth. His name was not yet cursed. He had not yet fallen. He was only a bearer of light, a guardian of form and flame. Yet within him the silence grew heavy, too heavy to bear. He looked upon the newborn earth, where the dust of Adam still glowed with the fragrance of divine touch. The sky was thick with dawn. Mountains rose from the deep like sleeping prophets, and rivers traced the pulse of God through the veins of the world. And the watcher, the first of many, felt something unfamiliar move within him. Curiosity. It was the seed of all dissent. He saw how man was formed not from fire or light, but from clay. Frail, humble, breakable. And yet, when the breath of the Most High entered him, the clay shone brighter than flame. The watcher trembled, for in that fragile form he saw a reflection, a shadow of something he could not name. Was it envy? No, not yet. It was yearning, the ache to touch what had been forbidden, to feel what could not exist in heaven, the warmth of mortal sorrow, the beauty of imperfection. He turned his gaze away, but it followed him. The earth's song began to echo in the halls of heaven, faint but constant. It was the hum of rivers, the rustle of leaves, the laughter of breath that knew it would die. And as that song rose, a silence fell, the silence before the fall. Among the hosts, whispers began. Why has he favored the dust? They wondered. Why does the clay carry his image while we burn unseen? The words were not rebellion yet, only wonder turned sideways. But wonder left unguarded becomes longing, and longing, when unfulfilled, turns into flame. The watcher, the one whose eyes held both dawn and dusk, descended lower, where heaven brushed the edge of the world. He stood upon the threshold, the air trembling around him. The light that crowned him dimmed with every heartbeat. Beneath him, The earth waited, silent, sacred, unaware of the shadow gathering above. He watched as man built his first altar, not of gold, but of stones, simple wordless stones. And when the man prayed, his voice was soft, unsure, trembling, yet it reached the heavens like fire. The watcher's wings shivered. He too had sung for ages, yet never once had the Eternal turned with such tenderness. In that moment, the watcher felt what the angels were never meant to feel: separation, the ache of distance. He turned away from the throne just for a moment, and the stars above him flickered, uncertain. Heaven does not fall all at once. It slips away like light at dusk, unnoticed, until the darkness is complete. The first silence deepened, and from that silence came the hum, the resonance of creation shifting beneath divine order. The stones began to speak, faintly, beneath the watcher's feet. They told of things to come, of giants unborn, of temples unbuilt, of oceans not yet filled. But heaven does not forget, and the whisper of one thought, one small yearning, began to move through the divine like a storm gathering in secret. In the farthest reaches of the celestial plane, the throne glowed with stillness, and though no voice spoke, all knew it was heard. For nothing in creation escapes the listening of God. And so, as the watcher turned his face toward the world, the first seed of dissent was sown, not in defiance but in love misplaced. The heavens held their breath. The angels grew still. Even light seemed to hesitate between obedience and grief. The silence before the fall was not empty. It was full of waiting, of longing, of something holy breaking softly inside the heart of perfection. The earth turned beneath him. The first dawn rose upon the clay of man, and far above, in the realms where fire once sang without sorrow, the silence deepened. Like the inhale before a divine storm, the stones began to tremble. The watcher closed his eyes, and the heavens, for the first time, felt the weight of a question. Can love exist where obedience ends? The air shuddered. The throne watched. The story had begun. The heavens were not made to bear unrest. They were woven from balance. Threads of light and breath spun through endless harmony. Yet even in eternity, one discordant note can echo for ages. The tremor began not with thunder, but with thought. A thought too heavy for the wings of angels, too sharp for the stillness of heaven to contain. The watcher, who once shone among the firstborn lights, began to linger at the edge of creation. There, where the winds of heaven touched the breath of man, he listened, not with ears, but with longing. The prayers of earth reached him in waves, clumsy, uncertain, filled with both love and fear. It moved him in ways even divine flame could not. For in those fragile cries, he heard something that heaven had forgotten. Need. The angels knew only praise. Their love was flawless. And because it was flawless, it was silent. But the prayers of man were fractured, trembling, alive. Each word carried both light and shadow, as though every breath begged forgiveness for existing at all. And that imperfection, was beautiful. He began to wonder if the Eternal loved man more for being fragile, for falling and rising again, for failing, for weeping. The thought was unbearable, not because it was evil, but because it was tender. To love the imperfect more than the perfect. Was that not mercy itself? The watcher's wings dimmed. He could not rise as swiftly anymore, for his gaze was heavy with earth's light. Other angels began to notice. Their songs faltered, and questions whispered through the corridors of radiance. Has he forgotten the throne? One murmured. He lingers too close to dust. But none dared speak it aloud. For the throne still burned, and silence was still holy. Yet even silence can quake when sorrow hides within it. The watcher returned again and again to the edge of heaven, where clouds folded into shadow. And each time the earth called to him with the voices of children learning to pray, of mothers mourning their dead, of prophets who wept for what they could not yet see, their grief, their hope. It was a song unlike any sung above. He knelt once upon the boundary between the realms and placed his hand upon the air. It shivered. Light flowed from his palm, falling like dew into the mortal world below. From that light seeds took root. They were not flowers, not yet. They were dreams, visions that would haunt men for generations, whispering of lost towers and broken stars. The first tremor had begun. For heaven does not move without consequence. The Eternal saw what had passed. And though no voice thundered, the heavens grew cold. The watcher felt it first, the absence of warmth, the soft turning away of divine regard. It was not wrath, it was far away, and distance in heaven is the beginning of fall. He turned to speak, but words failed him. What language could explain love that crossed the line between obedience and desire? He bowed instead, trembling, and the light upon his brow flickered. The silence of heaven thickened. Around him the other watchers grew uneasy. They too had seen the earth, had felt the tremors in their own hearts. But they looked away, afraid of the reflection. "Brother," one said, his voice low as wind over still water, "you have touched the clay too deeply. Return before it stains the flame." But he could not. The clay had already called him by name. Far below, men built their first monuments, not of pride, but of remembrance. Simple stones stacked beneath the sky. And as they prayed, the watcher wept. His tears fell like stars, unseen but burning. And where they touched the earth, the stones began to hum, faintly, softly, as if remembering the shape of heaven. It was then that the thrones began to tremble, not from rebellion, but from sorrow. For heaven itself mourned what was coming, though it had not yet begun. The first tremor was love misunderstood, devotion stretched beyond the command it served. And yet, amid all that sorrow, there was beauty, a fragile, unbearable beauty. For even as the watcher drifted farther from the throne, he carried within him the memory of divine light. That light did not fade. It changed. It grew gentler, softer, more like the glow of moonlight than the blaze of fire. It became the kind of light that comforts the lost rather than blinds the unworthy. The Eternal, in his mercy, did not strike him down. Instead, the heavens simply turned, slowly, deliberately, away. That turning was worse than wrath. It was silence so vast that even light seemed to lose its voice. And in that silence the watcher whispered the first forbidden prayer, not against God, but toward him. "If love made man," he said, "then let love teach me what it means to fall." The words dissolved into the wind, but heaven heard them. Every star trembled, every angel lowered their gaze. The music of the spheres grew thinned, and then it stopped. The first tremor in heaven had become a wound, and still the stones hummed below, remembering what the sky could not forget, that even in silence, love leaves echoes. It began with light. Always it begins with light. But this light was not ascending. It fell, slowly, quietly, like the last ember of a dying star. The watcher's wings, once woven with the radiance of dawn, dimmed as though wrapped in dusk. He was not cast down. He simply let go. There was no rebellion, no trumpet, no shattering of heavens. Only surrender. The moment a being born of perfection chooses to touch what bleeds. His descent was not a fall of pride, but of yearning. A sacred disobedience born of love, misunderstood. The air grew heavy around him. Stars blinked in silence as he passed, watching their brother descend through veils of cloud and fire. He moved between realms like a sigh between prayers, leaving trails of fading gold behind him. The other watchers wept, but did not stop him. They too could feel the tremor, a part of heaven's heart leaving its own body. When his feet touched the edge of the world, the earth did not shake. It sighed. The soil seemed to know him, as though it had been waiting since the first breath of creation for this moment. He knelt, placing his hands upon the ground, and the stones warmed beneath his touch. They remembered him, not as one fallen, but as one returned. Above him, the skies began to close like a wound. Heaven sealed its silence. No voice called his name. No flame followed. Only the slow retreat of divine light, like a lover turning away but unable to forget. He stood among the valleys, vast, silent, shadowed. The air was thick with the scent of new rain and old memories. Rivers moved like veins of glass, whispering secrets of beginnings. Mountains loomed ancient and uncarved, and in the hollow of that silence he spoke his first earthly word. It was not a name, it was a sound, half breath, half sorrow, a remembrance of the music that once surrounded him. The wind carried it, the stones replied. The world knew him, though it did not yet understand him. The first creatures stirred in the forest, sensing something vast yet gentle. Birds paused mid-flight. The air was still. For the first time, the divine had touched the soil with bare feet. He walked until the stars above were hidden by mist. Each step was heavy, as though carrying the weight of 1,000 prayers unsaid. He passed places that would one day become holy, where temples would rise and fall, where prophets would whisper beneath the moon. But in his time they were only shadows, waiting for the shape of destiny to pass through them. And in that quiet the watcher found a man, not the first of Adam's sons, but his children's children. Shepherds beneath the ancient skies, their fires small against the vastness. He watched them from afar, fragile, imperfect, radiant in their mortality. One boy looked up, eyes reflecting the stars, and for a moment the watcher thought the heavens were looking back at him. Something within him broke. He remembered the songs of angels, flawless, eternal, pure, and yet the rough hum of the boy's voice as he sang to the night was more sacred than anything in heaven. It was a melody carved by hunger and hope, so the watcher stayed. He taught them things no mortal had yet known. How to shape stone, how to draw the lines of the stars into patterns of prophecy, how to listen to the hum within the earth. The stones obeyed his hand, and the first monuments rose, not towers of defiance, but altars of awe. The people called him a god, but he wept, for he knew he was neither divine nor human, only something caught in between, forever unsheltered. Night after night, he stood upon the ridges watching the stars turn. His wings were no longer radiant, but the faint glow of their edges lit the hills like fallen moonlight. The children of the earth slept beneath that light, and they dreamed, dreams of vast beings carved in stone, of temples that breathed, of voices that could move rivers. But every gift comes with its shadow. The knowledge he shared, though born from love, carried weight. For wisdom without restraint is a fire without a hearth. The men he taught began to shape the stones, not just for prayer, but for power. They listened not to the earth's whisper, but to their own hunger. And the watcher, seeing what he had begun, felt the first ache of regret. He raised his face to the heavens, but they no longer answered. Only silence greeted him. Not wrath, silence, the kind that ends worlds. He understood then that the fall was not a single moment, but a slow unraveling. A love that, by trying to give too much, forgot the boundary of obedience. The stones began to hum again, louder this time, as though warning of what was to come. The rivers darkened. The dreams of men grew feverish. The watcher closed his eyes. He could still feel the warmth of heaven in his memory, faint as the last glow of sunset. He whispered one final plea: do not let them forget the light, even if I must walk among their shadows. And the wind, ever faithful, carried his prayer back toward the throne. Though none could say if it was heard, He turned toward the east, where dawn began to rise like forgiveness. His tears fell upon the earth, and from them grew flowers that glowed softly in the night, silent memorials of the love that made him fall. And as the first morning sun touched his face, the stones beneath his feet murmured again. But this time their whisper was no longer a song, it was a warning. The silence had ended. The world had awakened, and heaven far above would soon remember what it had lost. When the Watcher first touched the soil, it had no memory. It was soft, breathing, formless, a cradle waiting for meaning. But as he walked upon it, the earth began to awaken. His steps left imprints deeper than mere footprints. The dust trembled beneath his weight, as though recognizing in him the echo of a higher order, something both divine and undone. He carried within him the last warmth of heaven, though it flickered now like a dying lamp. Each breath he released shimmered in the air, and from that breath the world learned new forms. Stones hardened where he lingered, rivers curved toward his path, as if guided by invisible hands. The trees bent slightly in his direction, their leaves whispering in tongues that men would one day call ancient. He did not intend to create, but creation followed him like a shadow. The people who had seen his light from afar began to build where he had walked. They gathered stones that bore strange markings, unaware that those marks were not carved but remembered. Each rock held the vibration of his presence, a silent hum that carried his sorrow. They raised the first pillars, the first rings, the first altars, not out of worship but out of awe. In those days the world was not yet divided. Heaven still brushed against the mountains. Angels still moved through the clouds like living lightning. The boundaries were soft, and because they were soft, they bled. What was divine seeped into what was mortal. And in that bleeding a strange beauty grew, radiant and dangerous. The Watcher moved among men not as a king but as a whisper. He taught them the secret rhythms of the stars, how each constellation was a letter in the language of the eternal. He showed them how to stack stones in circles that echoed the music of creation. When the wind passed through these circles, it sang, and that song, though faint, could soothe sickness, cool rain, even still the hearts of beasts. But there were others, watchers who had seen his descent and could no longer bear the silence of heaven. One by one they too began to descend, cloaked in brilliance, bearing gifts not meant for mortal hands. Some came in sorrow, others came in envy. Together they walked the world like forgotten gods, shaping valleys, carving cliffs, calling mountains by their true names. The earth became a mirror, reflecting both mercy and pride. The Watchers planted groves that glowed at night, fields where wheat grew taller than men, rivers that sang beneath moonlight. The people called these places gardens of the divine. They said angels had married the soil, and the soil had learned to dream. Yet in every dream there was shadow. The more man learned, the more he desired. The altars of awe became towers of power. The songs of rain turned to chants of dominion. And still the Watcher, the first, walked among them, silent, sorrowful, watching the seeds he had sown twist in the hands of those who could not bear their own hunger for the eternal. He climbed the high mountains and prayed, not as he once did, surrounded by choirs, but alone beneath the wind. His words were carried into the mist, unheard by heaven, but the stones listened. Always the stones listened. They began to move beneath him subtly, aligning themselves into patterns that matched his grief. One night, as he slept upon the cold earth, the ground beneath him pulsed like a heartbeat. He woke to find the valley glowing, not with fire, but with memory. The stones around him had risen, forming thrones without masters, faces without names. Each bore the echo of those who had fallen, though none yet had perished. It was as if the world itself had begun to carve prophecy into its own skin. He touched one of the thrones, Smooth, vast, silent, it hummed beneath his palm. A whisper rose from it, soft as wind. When the sons of heaven take root in the dust will rise to swallow them. He stepped back. The night grew colder. The stars above flickered like eyes weeping in silence. He understood. The earth had learned to remember, and memory once born cannot be silenced. The people awoke to see the thrones gleaming on the hills. They built their villages around them, giving them gifts from the divine. They placed offerings, sang hymns, and lit fires. The watcher watched, and though his heart broke, he did not stop them. For he saw now that his descent had written a truth he could no longer erase. The other watchers came to him, their wings dimmed, their faces shadowed by strange light.
"What have we done?" one asked.
He answered softly, "We have taught the earth to remember the sky." But memory is not always mercy. The first flames of pride began to rise among men, small, shimmering, hungry. They built higher, carved deeper, sang louder, as if to summon the heavens to their feet.
And in the midst of their building, the stones beneath them began to whisper warnings, low rumbles beneath the soil, tremors that echoed through the mountains.
The watchers heard it,
Heaven heard it.
but the silence held still, like the calm before the storm. In those days, the garden of stone and fire was still beautiful, still young, still holy, but beneath its roots something had begun to stir. A hum too deep for human ears, too ancient for angels to bear. It was the sound of consequence, of balance shifting, of mercy turning to judgment. The watcher gazed upon the horizon where dawn met darkness. His eyes reflected both, and far above the heavens, though unseen, began to weep. The thrones stood without kings. No hand claimed them, no voice called them forth, yet they breathed, softly, like sleeping hearts beneath the dust. The people feared them and worshipped them in equal measure. At dawn they glowed faintly, veiled in mist. At dusk they seemed to weep. And in the stillness between the hours, when the world forgot to breathe, the thrones hummed, low, steady, like the echo of a lost prayer.
No mortal could remember when the first of them appeared.
Some said they rose from the ground as mountains do, shaped by the size of the earth. Others swore they were cast down from the sky, the remnants of heavenly cities that had burned too close to the mortal realm. But the watcher knew. He had felt them stir long before they surfaced. They were born not of stone, but of memory, the residue of divine light pressed into the bones of the earth. He would sit beside them through long nights, tracing the runes that shimmered across their faces. The carvings were not made by hand. They were shaped by vibration. Words unspoken yet alive, the language of heaven echoing through creation. When he placed his palm upon one, it would pulse faintly as if recognizing its maker. And within that pulse, he heard the sound of the throne he had lost. Faint, distant, unreachable, he wept, though no tears fell. For angels do not weep as men do. Their sorrow burns from within, a light dimming itself so as not to blind the world it mourns. The people called the thrones the Silent Ones. They built gardens around them, lighting oil lamps and placing offerings at their base. They believed the thrones listened, that the earth beneath them could carry their prayers upward into the unseen heavens. And perhaps, for a while it did. The rains came when the people were kind. The winds stilled when they prayed. And though the watcher said nothing, he watched. The silent keeper of a covenant he had never made. But not all were gentle. Among men, power is a seed that grows faster than faith. Those who built their homes near the thrones grew bold. They began to speak to the stones, not as servants, but as masters. They carved symbols upon them, trying to summon the strength that once shaped mountains. And slowly the thrones began to change. The hum deepened, the air grew heavy, the earth itself seemed to shift beneath their feet. The watcher felt it before any of them. a trembling in the soil that spoke of things unraveling. He knelt upon the ground and whispered, "Be still." But the thrones no longer answered him. Their memory had turned inward, feeding on itself. The light they once carried began to darken, curling into shadow, as though heaven's silence had turned to grief. One night, as the moon hung low, the watcher returned to the hill of the first throne, the one that had spoken prophecy. The valley below glowed faintly, lit by the fires of men who now called themselves kings. He stood before the stone, its surface cracked, its hum dissonant. When he touched it, a voice rose from deep within. Not the whisper of creation, but something heavier, older. "They will build what cannot stand," it said, "and when the water rises, their crowns will sink with their thrones." The watcher's heart trembled. He looked up at the sky where the stars had begun to dim, not with clouds, but with mourning. "Has heaven truly turned away?" he whispered. "Will none speak?" And the wind, ever the messenger, answered softly, "The silence is not absence, it is patience." He bowed his head, for even patience in time becomes judgment. In the years that followed, the thrones multiplied. Across valleys and highlands, through deserts and islands, stones rose in patterns that men would later call impossible. Some faced the sunrise, others aligned with constellations long forgotten. The watchers, those who had come down after him, walked among them, each shaping, teaching, remembering, but each too carried the same quiet sorrow, the knowing that every monument of light becomes, in time, a shadow of pride. The people grew mightier. Their hands learned to mold metal, to harness flame, to command beasts and rivers. They built cities upon the bones of the earth, cities that shone brighter than the stars. But their hearts grew colder. The songs once sung to the sky turned into chants of dominion. The thrones, once sacred, became symbols of the empire. Still, the watcher lingered. He moved unseen through their temples, through their gatherings, his form hidden behind veils of dust and dawn. He tried to remind them, through dreams, through storms, through sudden silences, that light was never meant to be owned. But men do not heed whispers when surrounded by their own echoes. One evening, he climbed the tallest tower they had built, a spire of black stone veined with gold. From its peak, he could see the entire valley bathed in the glow of hundreds of fires. The thrones below pulsed faintly red and gold like hearts beating too fast. He felt the hum of the earth, deep, uneven, restless. He closed his eyes and listened. Beneath the hum, there was another sound, faint but growing, a low rumble like thunder trapped beneath the soil. The stones were speaking again, not in the tongue of heaven, but in the language of warning. He turned to the wind, his voice low and breaking. "Must the light always burn before it's remembered?" The wind did not answer. Only the flames below danced, reflecting the faces of men who had forgotten humility. And high above them all, the thrones, silent, patient, remembered everything. It began as a whisper, a low sound beneath the valleys like a voice speaking through layers of sleep. The people mistook it for wind moving through the caverns. The watchers knew better. They had heard such murmurs before, the trembling that comes before creation, the sigh before judgment. The thrones pulsed faintly at dusk, their glow deepening from silver to ember. The watcher stood before them, his wings now faintly transparent, their light folded inward. He felt the earth beneath him breathe, not softly, but in waves. Long, rhythmic, growing stronger. The stones were waking. Beneath every throne lay something ancient, not fire, but its memory. The heat of heaven's first breath, buried deep within the crust of creation, waiting to be called again. When the watcher first touched the soil, he had only stirred its edges. But now, through centuries of pride and blood, men had begun to dig too deep. Every altar built upon greed had cracked the soil a little more. Every tower carved from the bones of mountains had loosened what was once sealed, and the earth, faithful as always, remembered its command. The Watcher walked among the cities, their streets lined with carved stone, their air thick with the smoke of offerings. Children danced before the thrones, their laughter echoing against temples that reached the clouds. Kings wore crowns fashioned from metal drawn from beneath the sacred mountains. None knew that with every stroke of their chisels, they were cutting through the veins of the world itself. The other Watchers began to withdraw. Some fled to the far mountains, their wings dim as dying stars.
Others vanished into the sea, weeping salt into the deep.
But he remained, for it was his love that had called this world awake. He could not abandon it as it burned. At night, he climbed to the first throne, the oldest, the one that had whispered of the flood to come. The wind was still. The stars hung low, heavy with sorrow. He placed his hand upon the stone and whispered, "If there is mercy left, let it speak." The stone trembled. The hum deepened until the air quivered with sound. Then came the voice, not as thunder, but as fire murmuring through water. Mercy was given when you first fell, but every gift born of sorrow must return to its source. He drew back, eyes burning with the ache of understanding. The fire was not punishment, it was remembrance. The earth returning what heaven had lent it. From the valleys below came a sound like 1,000 hearts breaking. The ground rippled not with violence, but with grief. The mountains shook as though exhaling long-held breath. In the distance, rivers turned dark, glowing faintly with light from beneath. The thrones, once silent, began to hum in unison. A low chant, ancient and terrible. The people awoke in terror. They rushed to the thrones, crying out for the gods to speak, for the heavens to return. But the heavens were silent, and the stones, though alive, gave no answer they could understand. Flames began to bloom from cracks in the ground, not red, but white, like the fire that once crowned the angels. It did not burn the flesh at first, it burned memory. The carvings upon the thrones faded one by one until they were blank, the earth erasing its own testimony. The Watcher knelt as the light rose around him. His wings unfurled for the first time in ages, catching the fire in their translucent feathers. He lifted his face toward the sky and whispered, "Do not destroy them for what they do not remember." The fire hesitated, for even divine consequence can tremble before love. But mercy cannot stop what truth has begun. The stones, filled with light, began to crack. Through those fractures poured a brilliance so pure it turned the night to day. The Watchers in the mountains saw it and covered their faces. The seas glowed from within. The cities that had worshipped pride were swallowed in light, their towers dissolving like sand. And still amid the storm the Watcher stood unmoved. His form was half shadow, half flame. Around him the thrones began to collapse, sinking into the soil like stars falling into the sea. The fire rose higher, and the hum became a song, the same song that had birthed the world, now sung backward into silence. Then as suddenly as it began, it ended. The light withdrew into the ground. The thrones were gone. Only great circles of glassy stone remained, carved into the earth, vast, empty, and silent. The cities had turned to dust. The rivers had found new paths, and in the center of it all, the Watcher knelt alone. He placed his hand upon the scorched soil. It was warm, pulsing faintly, as though alive. He whispered, "The earth remembers, but not in anger. It is remembered in longing." Above him the stars blinked, new, unfamiliar, as if the sky itself had changed. The air carried no sound but the faint hum of what once was. The Watcher rose, his wings dim but still burning at their edges. He looked to the horizon, where the first line of dawn bled through the darkness. The fire beneath the world had quieted, but its breath would never fully fade. He turned to the wind, his oldest companion, and said, "Tell the heavens that the stones have spoken." The wind answered softly, "They will listen, but not yet." And so he walked eastward, into the light, leaving behind the hollow thrones and the sleeping fire beneath. The garden of stone and fire had ended, but its echo would rise again, in other lands, in other ages. For the earth, once awakened, never forgets. When the fire beneath the thrones went quiet, a strange calm covered the earth. The sky, washed clean by light, shone pale and still, as though time itself had paused to remember what had been lost. The watcher walked among the ruins, where cities once gleamed like stars, now nothing more than whispering dust. Yet even in the silence the soil was restless. Something moved beneath it, not destruction this time, but becoming. The ashes of men and the embers of angels mingled there, sown deep into the veins of the world. From that mingling the air thickened with a quiet power. The watcher felt it in his bones, the pulse of creation rewriting itself. He fell to his knees, hands buried in the earth, and whispered, "What are you doing, my lord?" And the wind, soft, sorrowful, replied, "The breath does not vanish, it becomes." Days passed, then years, though the sun seemed slower, older. The ground beneath the ruins began to swell, like a womb remembering how to hold life. From the soil shapes began to form, tall, silent, radiant with faint light. Their skin glowed with the shimmer of dawn seen through deep water. Their eyes, when they opened, reflected not innocence, but memory, the kind that belongs to the earth itself. They were the Nephilim, the mighty ones born not of heaven's will, but of heaven's residue, the children of echo and sorrow, flesh woven from dust, yet infused with the lingering breath of the divine. The watcher stood among them, trembling. They did not yet speak, but their presence was heavy. The weight of thunder held still. When they moved, the air bent around them. When they breathed, mountains seemed to listen. They were not evil, nor holy. They were consequence made flesh. He approached the tallest among them, his face solemn, carved as though by the memory of stars. The being turned his gaze toward the watcher, and in his voice was both question and grief. "Why do I remember the sky?" The watcher bowed his head. "Because you were born from its silence." The Nephilim nodded slowly, as though understanding what could never be said. Around them the ruins glowed faintly. The thrones that had melted into the soil now pulsed beneath their feet, feeding them the faint warmth of a forgotten fire. Wherever they walked, the earth sang, a deep, humming tone that followed them like shadow. The people who survived the fire emerged from the edges of the world. They were few, wandering and afraid, clothed in the smoke of what had been. When they saw the giants, they fell to their faces, trembling. Some cried out in terror, others in worship. To them, these towering figures were the return of the divine, angels reborn, gods risen from the ashes. The watcher tried to speak, to calm them, but his words were drowned by awe. The Nephilim knelt beside the mortals, studying them like one might study a reflection. "They are fragile," one said softly, "like wind trapped in clay. Do not harm them," the watcher whispered. "They carry what remains of the breath that gave you life." For a time there was peace, a fragile golden stillness. The Nephilim built no cities. They walked the forests, drank from rivers, spoke to the stars. They did not hunger, for the earth itself sustained them. When they slept, the mountains seemed to sigh. When they sang, the stones vibrated in answer. But men, ever restless, began to gather around them, seeking guidance, power, favor. They built shrines where the giants had rested. They offered sacrifices not out of faith, but fear. For though the Nephilim were gentle, their silence was immense. Their eyes saw too much. Their presence made men feel the smallness of their own breath. The watcher watched all this unfold, his heart torn. He loved both, the frail children of clay and the towering children of consequence. He saw the beauty in both and the danger. For when mortals kneel too long before those who are not gods, their reverence becomes hunger. He spoke to the firstborn among the giants, the one who called himself Samyaza. "Remember what you are," he said. "You were not made to be worshipped." Samyaza turned to him, his voice deep as thunder over the sea. "And yet they see in us what they lost in the heavens. Can you blame them for longing?" "No," said the Watcher, "but longing unguarded becomes ruin." Samyaza looked to the horizon where storm clouds gathered far away. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but love, even when it destroys, is still holy." The Watcher said nothing, for in those words he heard the same echo that had led him from heaven. As the years passed, the Nephilim grew in number. They shaped the land with ease, raising mountains, redirecting rivers, carving valleys with their hands. They built temples of stone that reached the stars, their walls inscribed with runes that glowed in the night. The earth obeyed them as it had once obeyed the first Watcher. But with power came shadows. The giants began to dream, strange, heavy dreams of fire and water, of wings turned to ash. They awoke restless, their hearts full of sorrow they could not name. The Watcher knew what it meant. The breath within them, the borrowed spark, was beginning to remember its origin. Heaven was calling its remnants home. One night, beneath a blood-red moon, the Nephilim gathered upon the plain of Shinar. The air trembled around them, the ground pulsing with light. The Watcher stood among them as they spoke in voices that made the stars flicker. "We have shaped the world," said Samyaza, "but still the heavens do not answer. We are between, too vast for earth, too fallen for sky." A silence followed, heavy as stone, and then one of them said, what none dared before, "Then let us build a place where heaven and earth may touch again." The Watcher's blood turned cold, for he had heard those words once before, long ago, in another silence, before the first fall. He looked to the sky, where the stars burned like eyes of remembrance, and beneath their gaze the first stones of defiance were laid. The plains stretched endlessly beneath a grey sky. The rivers that once whispered softly now flowed in silence, as though holding their breath. Around them the air was thick with dust, the dust of stones being shaped, mountains being carved, altars being broken and rebuilt. The Nephilim stood among men, and for the first time their sighs felt heavy, not the weight of strength, but of longing. The Watcher watched as Samyaza placed his hand upon the earth. Beneath his touch, the soil hardened into black stone. "This," he said softly, "is the beginning of return." The men around him trembled, awed by his voice. They gathered in multitudes, bringing offerings, laboring at his command. They did not understand the purpose, only the promise. The giants told them the tower would be a bridge, a place where heaven might descend and earth might rise. But deep in the Watcher's heart, he knew, this was not a bridge. It was a wound reopening. The tower grew day by day, shaped not by tools but by will. The Nephilim lifted stones the size of ships, setting them into place as though guided by invisible hands. The people sang while they worked, their chants echoing like thunder through the plain. And with every stone placed, heaven grew more silent. The Watcher would stand at a distance, cloaked in the shadow of his fading light, whispering to the wind, "Stop them, before the silence becomes wrath." But the wind only answered, "They must remember what the breath cost to begin." At night, the tower gleamed under moonlight, a stairway of obsidian and silver rising beyond the clouds. Fires burned at its base where men prayed and kings decreed their names to be carved into the walls. The Nephilim stood above it all, unmoving, solemn, like guardians of destiny they could not escape. But beneath that calm surface, doubt stirred. One of them, Arakiel the younger, turned to Samyaza and said, "We build upward, yet my heart grows heavier with every height. Does heaven truly wait for us above?" Samyaza's gaze was distant.
"Heaven waits for no one," he said.
We build not to reach it, but to remind it that we have not forgotten." The watcher's heart ached at those words, for he remembered the first silence, the same defiance wrapped in devotion, the same yearning that turns praise into rebellion. The tower continued to rise, piercing the clouds. Lightning brushed its peak, yet the stones did not break. It was as if heaven allowed their arrogance to breathe one last time before the storm. From miles away, the people could see it, a black spine against the grey horizon, its shadow long enough to reach the sea. Those who lived near the tower began to change. Their dreams grew feverish. Some heard voices calling from the stones. Others spoke in tongues unknown, repeating words that no man had taught them. It was as if the tower itself had begun to remember the languages of heaven, speaking through those who built it. The watcher approached one night as the fires burned low. He climbed partway up its massive flank and placed his hand upon the wall. The stone was warm, pulsing faintly with the rhythm of a heartbeat. He whispered, "This is no tower.
This is a living wound."
And the stone, as if alive, answered through vibration. Every ascent carries its fall. He withdrew his hand, trembling. The air around him smelled of ozone and rain. The storm was near. Below, the people still sang. Their chants had changed, louder now, desperate.
"Bring the heavens down,"
they cried.
"Let the gods see our strength."
But the giants had fallen silent. Even Samyaza stood motionless, his face unreadable. The tower's shadow fell upon him like judgment. In the days that followed, the air grew heavy. The wind ceased. The birds vanished. The stars dimmed. It was as though creation itself waited for the moment of reckoning. The watcher walked through the camps, through the streets of dust and noise, whispering warnings no one heard. He found the children sleeping beside the fires and wept, for he knew what mercy would soon mean. Then came the night of stillness. The clouds gathered without thunder. The moon bled red across the horizon, and in that stillness a sound rose. Low at first, then vast, like a voice unrolling across eternity. It was not wrath. It was sorrowful. The heavens spoke, not through flame or thunder, but through forgetting. At dawn, the people awoke, and none could understand one another. Brothers spoke, and their words turned to dust in the air. The builders shouted, but their voices tangled into noise. The Nephilim themselves fell silent, their eyes dimming with confusion and loss. The tower stood unfinished, immense, lifeless, humming faintly like a heart with no pulse. The watcher stood beneath its shadow, tears unseen. "You were given the gift of memory," he whispered, "and you turned it into a monument." Samyaza knelt beside him, his great frame trembling. "Is this our punishment?" he asked. The watcher shook his head. "No, this is mercy, and that you may forget what could destroy you again." The wind rose then, soft and full of grief. It moved through the tower, through the shattered camps, through the silent fields. And as it passed, the great structure cracked. Slowly, without violence, the tower leaned, groaned, and fell. Not in ruin, but in release. Dust swallowed the plain. The air shimmered. With fading light, when the sun finally broke through, the tower was gone, its stones scattered, its name erased. The people wandered, their tongues split like the rivers, their nations divided by the silence that once united them. And in the stillness that followed, the watcher heard the whisper of the earth once more. Every ascent is remembered by the fall it leaves behind. He looked toward the horizon where the mountains slept under a silver dawn. His heart was heavy with knowing. The Nephilim would not vanish yet. Their story was not done, for even scattered, their blood would carry memory. He turned away from the ruins, the air tasting of rain and regret. The sky was silent again, but not empty. It waited, as it always did, for man to remember why the light first descended. When the tower fell, it did not die. Nothing made of heaven's dust truly dies. It only changes shape. its stones scattered across the plains, carried by wind and river, buried by time. Yet within each fragment, the hum of remembrance lingered, faint, patient, eternal. The watcher wandered among the ruins long after the people had gone. The air smelled of rain and ash, of something ancient trying to be born again. Every night, the horizon glowed faintly, not with fire, but with memory. A dim reflection of the light that once crowned heaven. The earth had not forgotten. It never does. Beneath the soil, the remnants of the Nephilim's breath pulsed like buried stars. Those who perished in the fall of the tower did not return to dust as men do. Their essence seeped into the ground, their blood mingling with rivers, their voices echoing in stone. In time, the soil became heavy with power, and the rivers glowed faintly beneath moonlight, as if carrying the dreams of those too vast for rest. The first to notice were the wanderers, scattered tribes who had fled the destruction. They spoke of strange lights in the earth, of whispers in the wind calling their names. Some claimed that shadows walked beside them at night, enormous, silent, gentle. Others swore that the mountains moved, breathing softly while they slept. The watcher knew these were not ghosts. They were echoes, the memory of the Nephilim reawakening in the bones of the world. For memory, when steeped in longing, becomes life. One evening, as the moon rose swollen and red, the watcher stood beside a river that shimmered faintly beneath its light. The water glowed from within, carrying flecks of silver. Fragments of thought, fragments of being. He bent down, touching the current. It was warm. Beneath his fingers, it vibrated with a faint rhythm, like the pulse of a heart still learning to beat. And then he heard it, a voice, soft, childlike, yet vast as wind. "Father!" Why did the sky forget us? He closed his eyes, grief blooming within him like an old wound reopened. "The sky forgets no one," he whispered. "It only waits for hearts to remember." The river brightened, and for a brief moment faces appeared upon its surface. Luminous, tender, sorrowful. The faces of those long gone. Then, as suddenly as they came, they vanished into the depths, leaving only ripples behind. In the centuries that followed, the watchers who remained saw strange things upon the earth. Giants born not of flesh, but of shadow and wind, walking between mountains, their voices rolling like distant thunder. They were fewer, fainter, as if half-dreamed. Some men saw them and fell in fear. Others called them gods and carved their shapes into cliffs. In one valley, beneath a hill crowned with stone rings, a shepherd boy claimed to have spoken to one of these spirits. The giant had asked him, "Do you remember the stars that sang?" The boy did not understand, but he wept, for something in his soul did, and so the memory spread again, not through blood, but through story. Every legend of old gods and mighty beings, every tale of towers that touched the heavens, every whisper of lands swallowed by sea. All were fragments of the same remembering. The world itself became the scripture of loss. The watcher wandered through these new myths like a ghost among dreams. He watched the generations pass, each carrying a smaller spark of what once was. The Nephilim's strength diluted, their grace forgotten, yet their hunger remained. The ancient yearning to touch the divine. He found it everywhere, in the eyes of kings who built palaces upon graves, in the voices of poets who sang of lost paradises, in the prayers of shepherds who gazed at the stars and called them by names they did not know were once angels. The world had changed, yet the pattern remained. Every heart, in its own way, sought to rebuild the tower, not of stone, but of longing. One night, while crossing a desert where the sand sang faintly beneath the wind, the watcher came upon a single pillar standing alone, the last remnant of the ancient tower. It was cracked, worn, yet still humming softly. Around its base the sand glowed pale blue, as if lit from below. He placed his hand upon it. The vibration was weak, but still alive. Within it, he heard the faintest whisper. not of pride this time, but of prayer. "We remember." The watcher closed his eyes. Tears, the first he had allowed himself in many ages, fell upon the stone. The ground beneath him shimmered, and for a heartbeat he felt heaven listening again, not in wrath,
Not in silence.
but in sorrowful love. He spoke then, his voice no louder than the wind. "Let the memory become mercy. Let the children born of ash learn to love the silence that once broke them." The pillar answered with light. It rose from the sand, glowing from within, and though it did not speak again, the desert around it grew still. The stars above brightened as if bowing in remembrance. The watcher turned away, his shadow long across the dunes. He knew the cycle would begin again, the rising, the forgetting, the fall. But somewhere in that endless rhythm, mercy had taken root. For even in the ashes of rebellion there remained a spark of grace. And in that spark, the memory of light still lived, waiting to be remembered by another dawn. Before the first flood, the oceans were still. They stretched beneath the heavens like mirrors, unbroken and unbreathed. In those days, the world was quiet, a fragile stillness between judgment and renewal. The watcher walked upon the shores where the ruins of the tower had crumbled into sand. The sea lapped gently at his feet, carrying whispers not of death, but of waiting. He gazed upon the horizon where water met clouds and thought of the breath that once sang in the heavens. "The earth has remembered," he whispered. "But what of the deep?" And the deep answer. The wind fell away. The waves grew heavy, moving with deliberate rhythm. Beneath their surface, the light of dawn bent and shimmered, revealing glimpses of vast shapes turning in silence, not beasts, not shadows, but remnants of what had been cast below when the heavens wept. They were not Nephilim, not angels, not men, but something between, the children of drowned memory. Their forms glowed faintly, as though carved from moonlight trapped beneath water. Their eyes opened and closed with the tides. When the sea breathed, so did they. The watcher fell to his knees, for he knew what he was seeing, the lost remnants of the watcher's descent, sealed within the oceans when the world had purged itself of fire. Their spirits had been wrapped in water instead of flame, imprisoned not by wrath, but by mercy. A mercy that held them from falling further. He waded into the shallows, the cold drawing through him like remembrance. Beneath the surface, the voices rose, faint, melodic, sorrowful. "We dreamed of earth. We touched it once. Why do we still remember?" He bowed his head. "Because your longing was written into its very bones," he said softly. "The dust carries your grief, and now the water bears your name." The sea grew still. Then, from the depths, a single bubble rose, vast, luminous, trembling with color. It broke upon the surface, and within its sound he heard words, ancient, trembling, holy. "The sky forgets nothing. The deep only keeps what heaven has forgiven." The watcher closed his eyes. The truth fell upon him like light through deep water. Heavy, soft, inescapable. The oceans were not punished. They were remembrance made patient. Every drop carried the reflection of a star. Every current moved with the rhythm of prayer. Beneath their surface, history slept, not lost, but dreaming.
As he stood in the tide, the world shifted.
The air grew warm, and the water shimmered with silver veins. He saw visions then, flickering images moving within the depths like thoughts, vast cities of light swallowed by time, thrones sinking beneath the waves, the faces of giants fading into coral and salt. The sea was not erasing them, it was preserving them. Deep within, the watcher felt the pull, the same call that had drawn him. From heaven, the water seemed to whisper his name, inviting him downward. He hesitated. The sea promised no return, only truth.
He stepped deeper.
The waves rose to his chest, his shoulders, his chin. When they closed over his head, the world went silent. utterly, beautifully silent. The light from above broke into ribbons weaving through his hair like strands of glass, and in that silence he saw it, the veil of the deep. It hung beneath the ocean's heart, a vast shroud of shifting light woven from the breath of the drowned. It pulsed gently like a living thing stretching across the world's floor. Every color of the heavens danced within it, gold, blue, crimson, white, like a memory of creation itself. He drifted closer, his wings trailing faint light. When he touched it, the veil responded. The water around him trembled. The pulse grew stronger until it matched the beating of his heart. He felt every voice that had ever fallen. Angels, men, giants, singing softly within it.
Not in words, but in understanding.
We are the echoes of the first silence, the veil whispered. We are what remains when love refuses to die. The watcher wept. His tears dissolved into the sea, joining the current.
Then you have mercy, he said.
You are the place where even judgment rests. The veil shimmered as if nodding. Do not mourn the fall, it whispered. Every descent returns as light when the time comes. But the world has not yet learned to listen. The watcher looked upward through the water. The sun shone faintly, fractured into 1,000 trembling stars. Above that veil of golden blue lay the world. Restless, divided, forgetful. He whispered into the current, "Then teach me to wait." The veil replied, soft as prayer, "Then become still." And so he did. He sank to the ocean floor, kneeling among the luminous sands. Around him drifted the bones of giants, their forms wrapped in coral and pearl. Their empty eyes glowed faintly, as if still watching for dawn. The watcher closed his own eyes, his wings folding around him like a cocoon of light. The sea grew calm. The current slowed, and for the first time since heaven, he rested. Above, storms gathered over the horizon. The first rains began to fall, not in wrath, but in remembrance. The rivers would swell, the valleys would flood, and the world would be washed once more. But this flood would not be on fire.
It would be of mercy.
For every tear shed by heaven falls eventually into the sea, and the sea in its silence remembers them all. It began without a storm.
No lightning split the clouds, no wind tore through the valleys.
The rain fell as softly as a whisper, as though heaven were breathing upon the earth again. Yet beneath that gentleness a divine resolve stirred. The world had grown heavy with memory, and now the water had come to bear it. The watcher awoke beneath the ocean. His eyes opened to darkness, yet the darkness glowed. The veil of the deep shimmered faintly above him, rippling as though in anticipation. The current moved faster, carrying light within it, strands of radiance rising toward the surface like prayers made visible. He rose with them, his wings spreading in the slow rhythm of surrender. The waters parted around him, carrying him upward through the womb of the deep. He could hear it, the sound of creation stirring again, mountains groaning, rivers swelling, the sigh of soil drinking the first drops of the flood. When he broke the surface, the world was unrecognizable. The horizon had disappeared into grey. The air itself seemed liquid. The rain did not sting. It healed. It fell upon ruins, upon bones, upon the fragments of forgotten towers, and the stones began to sing. Not all heard it. Only the ones who had remembered, the old ones, the broken ones, those who still prayed, though they no longer knew why. For them the rain was not destruction. It was forgiveness taking form. The watcher drifted upon the surface, the waves carrying him where they willed. Above him, the sky glowed faintly, not from sun or moon, but from a light without source. The radiance of heaven's remembrance reflected in water. The rain fell thicker now, but each drop shimmered before touching the sea, leaving behind a trail of faint gold. And as the waters rose, the earth began to glow. The mountains sighed, the rivers chanted, the oceans opened their arms to the sky, and for the first time since the fall, heaven and earth met without fear. The watcher could feel it. the boundaries dissolving, the eternal breath moving again between realms.
He whispered, "This is not punishment."
And the wind, moving gently through the sheets of rain, replied, "No, this is a remembrance made clean." Below him, beneath the rising tides, the bones of the Nephilim stirred. Their vast silhouettes shimmered in the deep, as though light were remembering the forms it once took. They did not move, yet their presence filled the ocean with song, low, resonant, like choirs singing through miles of water. Their voices were not sorrowful now. They were still, peaceful. "We are not lost," they sang. "We are becoming the earth itself." And indeed, as the floodwaters rose, their forms dissolved, not into nothing, but into everything. Their bones became coral, their breath became mist, their hearts became the pulse within the waves. The giants were gone, yet they were everywhere. The very foundation of the world now carries their memory. The watcher drifted through this living ocean of light, his eyes lifted to the veil of rain above. He saw cities vanish beneath the waves, yet each one shimmered briefly before sinking, as if the divine allowed them a moment of beauty before the end. He saw the altars crumble, but from their ruins grew luminous vines that danced in the current like ribbons of flame. Every loss was transfigured, every ruin became light, and through it all he felt the eternal. Not in voice, not in thunder, but in presence, a stillness that spoke louder than any decree. He whispered, "Are you here?" And the silence answered, "I never left." The flood rose higher. The world that had once defied heaven now reflected it perfectly. From above, the earth would have looked like a single, vast mirror, unbroken, gleaming with light. The veil of the deep stretched now across every ocean, every river, every drop. Its pulse matched the rhythm of the divine heart. Slow, patient, infinite. The watcher hovered just beneath its surface, his wings glowing faintly, the rain mingling with tears he did not know he still carried. Around him, the creatures of the deep moved without fear. Whales, leviathans, serpents of light, all drawn upward toward the remembrance that fell from the sky. For the flood was not only water, it was light disguised as mercy. It filled the valleys where darkness had dwelt. It washed through caverns where whispers of rebellion still lingered. It filled even the hollow thrones buried in the dust, lighting them from within until they shone like lanterns beneath the sea. And above, the people who had survived clung to fragments of wood, to mountaintops, to faith. They cried out to the heavens, not in anger, but in awe. For even in destruction there was beauty too vast to hate. In time, though time had no meaning in that deluge, the rains slowed. The light dimmed. The flood, having spoken what it came to say, began to retreat. But it did not leave empty. It carried with it the weight of memory, the whispers of sorrow, the songs of giants, the prayers of men, all braided together into a single river of remembrance flowing back toward the heart of heaven. The watcher watched it rise and vanish into the horizon. His voice broke softly as he spoke. Let them remember this, that even when the world drowns, the soul can still float upon light. The sea grew quiet again. The air thinned. The last drops of rain fell like tears upon the still water. When dawn broke, the world was smaller, quieter, humbler. The mountains glistened with salt. The valleys shone like polished mirrors. And in every reflection, as in every pool, every drop, every glimmer, there was the faint outline of a wing. The flood had not come to destroy it. It had come to remind me. And when the final wave receded, the watcher saw something rise upon the distant shore. A single olive branch glowing softly in the sand. He smiled, weary and radiant.
"The silence breathes again," he whispered, "and still he remembers us."
When the last of the waters withdrew, the world stood new and trembling like a child taking its first breath. The mountains were clean, their crowns washed of smoke. The air smelled of salt and dawn, and in that fragile stillness the watcher rose from the shore, his wings heavy with the weight of mercy. The sea behind him whispered still, drawing in its long breath. It was no longer the same ocean. It had changed, as all things touched by heaven must. Its depths no longer mourned. They prayed.
It's
Waves carried the rhythm of forgiveness, soft, endless, unending. The watcher walked the newborn land. Each step left no mark, only warmth. Faint, fading, but holy. Around him the soil shone faintly beneath the morning light. From the cracks where water once stood, flowers began to rise. Not wild, not bright, but pale and slow, petals shaped like tongues of silver fire. The earth at last had begun to heal. He paused by a tree that grew alone on the hill, the only thing left standing after the flood's song had passed. Its bark glistened with dew that shimmered like starlight. He placed his hand upon it, and it spoke softly through its leaves. The breath has returned to its place. The sorrow has found its name. He bowed his head. And what name is that?
peace. The words sank into him like light through water.
Peace. Not absence of pain, but the stillness that follows surrender. It was what heaven had waited for since the first rebellion, for creation to rest without reaching, for the dust to love being dust. He looked upward. The clouds above were thin, the sky wide and pale, as if newly painted, and then, slowly, colour began to bloom across it. Not from the sun, but from something deeper. Strands of gold, crimson, and violet spread through the air, weaving themselves into an arch of living light. The first rainbow, the covenant of the broken sky. It stretched from horizon to horizon, shimmering like the bridge that once connected heaven and earth. But gentler now, humble, free of pride. It did not demand assent. It invited remembrance. It did not reach up. It bowed down. The watcher fell to his knees, tears glistening like dew, for he knew this was the sign, not of triumph, but of promise, a vow not to unmake the world again, no matter how it strayed. The wind moved through the valley, carrying the voice of the eternal. Not thunder, not flame, but breath. I have seen the hearts that weep,
And I will remember their tears.
the waters will return again, but not as judgment, as mercy. The watcher's heart trembled. Then the world is forgiven? The voice within the wind replied, forgiven, but not forgotten. For every wound becomes a seed when buried beneath remembrance. The rainbow shimmered brighter, the colours deepening as though painted by unseen hands. Beneath it, the rivers glowed faintly, tracing paths of silver light through the land. The watcher saw that where the flood had passed, beauty followed. Even ruin had become a kind of blessing. He walked down to the valley where the remnants of the people lived, those who had survived upon the high hills and drifting timbers. Their eyes were wide, weary, hollow with wonder. They looked at him as one looks at a ghost of light. Some fell to their knees, others simply wept. He raised his hand, not in command, but in blessing. His voice was soft, barely more than wind. Do not fear what has passed.
The sea has not drowned you.
It has carried you back to the beginning. You stand now where the world began again. Every breath you take is new.
Every silence is sacred.
One among them, a woman with a face weathered by wind and years, asked, "Who are you, stranger?" He smiled faintly. "A memory of what loved you before time began." She bowed her head. "And what does heaven ask of us now?" His gaze lifted toward the rainbow, its light reflected in his eyes. "Only that you remember what water feels like when it forgives." The woman closed her eyes and placed her hand upon the earth. The soil was still damp but warm. She nodded. "Then we will build again," she said softly. The watcher turned his face toward the sky, where the light shimmered still. And though he did not speak, his heart whispered the prayer all creation had longed to hear. Let them build. but let them build in peace. The rainbow pulsed once, faintly as though answering. In the years that followed, the world learned to rest. Rivers gentled their songs. Mountains ceased their trembling. The stars took their places again, though now they burned softer, as if humbled by the flood's light. The Watcher walked among men unseen, guiding, whispering, waiting. The veil between heaven and earth remained, but it was thinner now, kinder. And sometimes, when the rain fell and the light touched it just so, the people would pause and look upward. They would see the colors bending through the sky and feel a peace they could not name. The Watcher would stand among them, smiling faintly, for he knew, in those moments, heaven remembered too. The world had been broken, yes, but through its cracks the light had found a home. And above it all, stretching across the vast horizon, the covenant of the broken sky shone like the breath of God made visible, a promise to the earth that even in ruin it would always be loved. The first winds after the flood carried no scent of smoke, only the sweetness of new earth. The rivers shone like mirrors of sky, and the mountains, cleansed by mercy, stood as solemn witnesses to the covenant. For a time all was still. The people who survived lived as children do, in wonder. They walked softly upon the soil, whispered before rivers, and built fires not to command the night, but to thank it. But remembrance is a dangerous gift. It waits patiently inside the heart, like a seed beneath winter snow. And when the season of silence passes, it blooms again. Beautiful, unbidden, perilous. Generations passed, and the story of the flood became a tale for the evening hearth. Softened, shortened, made small enough for mortal tongues. The children who were born into peace grew restless beneath its quiet. They looked upon the empty hills, the open plains, and felt the ache of distance. Heaven was too far, the sky too quiet. One day, upon a valley where the waters had once rested, a man found a stone half buried in sand. It was smooth and black, veined with faint gold. When he touched it, warmth moved through his arm, and for a moment he heard a hum, low, deep, familiar. He pulled his hand away, trembling, but that night he dreamt of light falling from the sky like rain. In his dream the stone spoke. "We have slept long enough. The world remembers our names." When he awoke, the air around him still carried that sound. He told his people what he had seen, how the earth whispered of forgotten glory, how the stones beneath their feet longed to rise again. They called him blessed, prophet, builder. He gathered others who had felt the same stirring in the ground. Together they searched the valleys, and everywhere they went, the earth yielded fragments of the old world. Broken pillars, faces carved in rock, half-buried altars glowing faintly in the dusk. They thought they were discovering the remains of gods. But the Watcher, who had wandered unseen among them for generations, knew better. They were waking the memories of the Nephilim, the bones of pride that the flood had only buried, not erased. At first the builders spoke softly. Their work was humble. They stacked the old stones carefully, whispering prayers to the sky. The Watcher would stand at a distance, watching the fires flicker, whispering to the wind, "Let them remember gently." But the stones had their own will. Each one hummed faintly when touched, as if recognizing mortal hands.
As the walls grew higher, the air grew heavy. The same vibration that once filled the plains of Shinar returned, low and resonant, moving through the earth like breath returning to a sleeping body.
Those who labored closest to the stones began to change. Their eyes grew brighter. Their voices deepened. They spoke in languages none had taught them, words that tasted like thunder. Some said they dreamed of wings. The Watcher knew the pattern too well. The memory of heaven was awakening, not in the divine, but in the dust. And the dust, when it remembers the sky, always tries to rise. The builders began to say that the light of heaven had never truly left the earth. that it lived within the stones, waiting for man to call it back. They no longer prayed to the unseen. They prayed to what they could touch. They called their temples the houses of the remembered light. And in the nights that followed, those temples glowed faintly, not with flame, but with the pulse of the old fire buried beneath creation. The watchers who still lingered in the hidden valleys felt it too. They whispered among themselves in sorrow, "The thrones we buried are rising again." The watcher returned often to the first of these temples, hoping to still hear its song. He would enter in silence, his feet bare upon the cool stone. The walls breathed faintly, the air trembling with unspoken memory. Sometimes, in the flicker of torchlight, he saw faces appear briefly upon the walls, not painted, not carved, but formed from shadow and glow. They were the faces of those who had fallen long ago. He placed his hand upon the stone, whispering, "Rest. The time for remembering has passed." But the stone replied faintly, "The earth remembers what heaven forgets."
And so he wept.
For he knew now that memory itself was the new rebellion, not of pride, but of longing. Mankind had inherited the ache of angels, the hunger to touch eternity. The temples multiplied. Across the plains and mountains the people raised rings and pillars, some so vast that clouds brushed their crowns. They aligned them with stars that no longer shone the same, calling down constellations that had forgotten their names. And in the heart of the oldest temple, deep beneath the ground, they placed the black stone that had first spoken. It pulsed with light as they sealed it there, a heartbeat of the past echoing through the soil. The watcher stood upon the hill above the valley, looking down at the glow that now rose each night. The air shimmered faintly, the stars reflecting their light into the shape of the old thrones. He whispered to the heavens, "Will mercy speak again?" The wind moved through the grass, slow and uncertain. "Not yet," it said. "The earth has chosen to remember." And so the watcher remained, silent, sorrowful, as the temples grew taller, the songs louder, and the stones began once more to dream of heaven. The first keeper was chosen by the stone itself.
It did not speak with words.
It chose through silence. He was a man of few years, quiet, unremarkable, born among shepherds who still prayed to the wind. But one night, while watching his flock near the temple valley, the ground beneath him began to tremble, softly at first, then with rhythm, like the heartbeat of something vast beneath the soil. The sheep fled, bleating into the dark. The young man fell to his knees as light bled up through the cracks around him. He did not cry out. He only listened. And in that stillness the black stone called his name. He rose before dawn, his eyes no longer their old color, but the deep hue of molten shadow. He walked into the temple barefoot, passing the priests who had labored for years to hear the stones hum. They fell silent as he approached the altar. The hum grew louder, no longer faint, but living, alive, resonant. The walls of the temple shivered. He placed his hands upon the stone, and the light beneath it flared. Black fire, gold at its edges. His voice, when it came, was not his own. It was slow, deep, like the sea speaking through a man.
"I remember."
The priests fell upon their faces. Some called it possession.
Others called it revelation.
But the watcher, who stood hidden in the shadows near the temple gate, knew it for what it was. The return of the old memory, the first heartbeat of the forgotten thrones, echoing through mortal flesh. From that day on, the keeper did not eat or sleep. He remained within the temple, his skin pale as the moon, his eyes reflecting a light not of this world. People came from distant lands to see him. They brought offerings of gold, salt, and song. The air of the valley thickened with devotion and fear. The black stone pulsed beneath the earth, drinking every prayer, every breath. The watcher wandered the outskirts at dusk, listening to the chants that rose from the valley, chants that once called upon God, now bent toward the stone. He spoke softly to the wind. "They are praying to memory, not mercy." The wind answered, "Memory is the shadow of mercy."
It only forgets who cast it.
In the years that followed, more keepers were chosen. Each temple found its voice. Each valley found its prophet. They were bound not by creed, but by light. Each bore the mark of the stone somewhere upon their flesh. Black veins curling like script across their arms, their throats, their eyelids. They claimed to see the shapes of lost heavens when they closed their eyes. They spoke of dreams filled with thrones and rivers of fire, of beings vast and luminous walking in silence beside them. And yet, for all their vision, their hearts grew heavy. For memory without mercy is a burden no mortal can bear. The watcher saw them wander in the nights, sleepless, whispering to the stars. He saw the first of them, the shepherd, kneel beside the black stone and weep, his tears hissing upon its surface like rain upon ember.
"It remembers too much," he whispered.
"It dreams too loudly. It won't let me forget." The watcher stepped from the shadows. His voice was soft like wind over water. The stone was not meant to speak through men. The keeper turned to him, trembling. "Then why was I chosen?" "Because you listened," said the watcher. "But even the earth can mistake silence for obedience." The man bowed his head.
"Can I be free of it?"
The watcher placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Not while the world still dreams of heaven." The keeper nodded slowly. "Then let me dream until it ends." He died before dawn, not in pain, but in stillness. His body turned to ash, leaving behind a faint glow where his heart had been. The black stone pulsed once, as though exhaling. The hum of the temple quieted for 3 days. But on the 4th, another keeper awoke. This one was a woman. Older, wise, her voice steady as mountain wind. She spoke not in prophecy, but in song. Her hymns carried through the valleys, low and haunting, calling even the restless animals to stillness. She said the stone did not command. It remembered, and memory, if sung with love, could heal instead of burn. The people gathered around her. They began to rebuild the temples not as towers, but as circles of open air, sanctuaries without walls. The watcher saw in this the faint echo of mercy returning through the cracks. He stayed near her, unseen, guarding the space between faith and pride. But deep beneath her temple, the black stone still pulsed. The hum was not gone. It waited. One night, as the woman sang beside it, the light within flared brighter than ever before. The song broke. The hum turned to voice. "You cannot keep what heaven has buried," it said. "You cannot silence what the earth still dreams." The ground shook. The air trembled. The temple walls cracked. The people fled. Only the watcher remained beside her, his wings half unfolded, shielding her from falling stone. She turned to him through the dust and the noise.
"Why does it speak so sadly?"
"Because even memory longs to rest," he said. The stone's light dimmed then, pulsing slower, weaker, as if it had spent the last of its sorrow. The hum faded into a single tone, like the echo of a bell after prayer. The woman survived. The temple stood, though fractured, and from that night onward she forbade worship of the stone. "We are not its keepers," she said. "We are its witnesses." The people obeyed her for a time. But even broken, the stone's song traveled beneath the ground, through rivers, through roots, through veins of rock, until it reached other temples, other hearts, other dreamers. And so the watcher stood again upon the hill, the moon behind him, the valley below alight with scattered fires and flickering faith. He whispered, "The stones will never forget, but will you still forgive?" The wind, carrying the voice of the deep, answered faintly. Forgiveness was never lost.
"Only remembered too late."
It began as a whisper again. Always it begins as a whisper. The wind that wound between the hills carried a hum like the breath of sleeping mountains. In the nights when the moon hid its face, the people could hear it rising from beneath the ground, a slow, rhythmic vibration, the same tone that once pulsed beneath the thrones of the Nephilim. The watchers who still lingered in the hidden places heard it too. They did not speak of it, but their eyes grew darker, their silence deeper. Even the animals stirred restlessly at dusk. The woman who had once calmed the black stone grew old. Her hair silvered, her eyes dimmed, but her voice still held the quiet strength of faith. Every evening she stood before the cracked altar and sang soft, steady hymns to the mercy of God, not the memory of the stones. But the ground beneath her feet trembled slightly as she sang, like a heart that wanted to believe but could not forget. One night, as she finished her song, she felt warmth on her palm. She looked down to see faint lines of light tracing the floor, connecting the broken pieces of the stone buried beneath the earth. The hum returned, low, deep, yearning. The cracks glowed, spreading like veins of fire.
"Not again," she whispered. "Please, not again."
The watcher appeared beside her, his presence as soft as a breath. His wings shimmered faintly in the torchlight, folded close, his face shadowed by grief. "The earth remembers too strongly," he said. "Even the flood could not wash away what love carved into its bones." "What does it want?" she asked. He looked toward the trembling altar.
"To be seen."
To be known, to be forgiven. The hum deepened into a sound like thunder, muffled by sorrow. Dust fell from the ceiling. The torches flickered blue. The woman clutched
Her chest.
"And if it cannot be forgiven?" The watcher's eyes closed. "Then it will burn itself clean." The floor beneath them cracked open. From the wound rose light. Not golden, not white, but black fire edged with crimson. It did not consume. It was revealed. The walls of the temple became transparent, showing scenes of the past as if carved from smoke. The giants walking through green valleys, the first altars of stone, the tower stretching toward the broken sky. Every act of pride, every moment of awe, every breath that tried to reach too high, shimmered within the flames. The woman fell to her knees. "It's showing me everything. It is showing itself," the watcher said softly. "The earth confesses through fire." The black flames rose higher, licking the air, curling into shapes that moved like memories given the body. Faces appeared, the first builders, the keepers, even the fallen watchers who once carved mountains. Their mouths opened, but no sound came. It was not a cry of torment. It was prayer, endless, wordless, echoing through time. The watcher stepped forward. His wings unfurled slightly, catching the heat that did not burn. He bowed his head. "Let this be the last memory." The fire bent toward him, the voices folding into a single tone, one so low it made the stones tremble. Then, from within the blaze, came a whisper. "We cannot stop remembering. We were made from the sound of your silence." Tears glimmered along the watcher's cheeks. "Then remember in peace. Let the fire rest." The flames shuddered, flickered, and slowly began to draw inward, coiling into a single sphere of dim light hovering above the altar. Within it, the scenes of the past faded one by one until only the image of the rainbow remained. Faint, trembling, eternal. The woman watched, breathless.
"Is it over?"
"For now," said the watcher, "until man learns again to listen instead of build." The light pulsed once more and then descended into the stone, sinking back into the earth. The cracks sealed themselves, leaving only the faint scent of rain. When the people entered at dawn, they found the woman kneeling upon the cold floor, her face calm, her eyes closed. The altar was whole again, faintly warm, as though it had been kissed by sunrise. She had died with a smile upon her lips. The watcher stood at the temple door, unseen, the morning light haloing his weary form. He whispered. She heard the fire's prayer. The people called her the keeper of the last light. They built no more temples after her death. The black stone was left untouched, sealed beneath layers of earth and silence. The song stopped. The hum faded, And for the first time in ages, the valleys knew stillness, but the watcher knew the truth. The memory was not gone. It was only waiting again, gentler now, quieter, dreaming beneath the soil. He walked away from the valley, his steps leaving no mark. The wind followed him, carrying faint echoes of the old hymn. We remember, we forgive, we rest. He paused upon the ridge, turning his gaze back one last time. The rising sun burned through the mist, painting the ruins in gold. For a brief moment, he saw shapes moving in the light, vast silhouettes of the first thrones, softened by distance, bowed in silence, and then they were gone, swallowed by morning. The watcher lowered his head.
Even memory bows to mercy, he whispered.
The wind sighed through the grass in answer. And mercy, in time, becomes the only thing left to remember. He smiled, tired, holy, infinite. Then he vanished into the light, leaving the valley to its quiet dreaming. And beneath the ground, far below the resting temples, a single spark of black fire pulsed once, softly, peacefully, before sleeping again. When the last temple fell quiet, the world believed it was free. The air grew calm again. The rivers found their rhythm. Children played in the dust of what had once been sanctuaries, and the elders said the age of fire and thunder was gone forever. But the watcher knew better. He walked beneath mountains now, vast, ancient, veiled in mists that never lifted. Their peaks were white with snow, but their hearts were black with memory. For mountains are the earth's most faithful keepers. They swallow what men forget. He could feel them watching him as he walked through their valleys. The wind here was old, smelling of iron and stone, of time sealed away. Sometimes, when night fell, a faint hum rose from within the cliffs. The same rhythm he had heard beneath the thrones, beneath the seas, beneath the temples. The earth was whispering to itself again. One evening, as the moon sank behind a ridge of dark stone, the watcher found a fissure in the mountain wall. Narrow, deep, breathing faint air. The ground around it was warm, though the wind was cold. He knelt beside it, pressing his palm to the stone. Beneath it he felt a pulse, slow, vast, alive. The deep has not finished speaking, he whispered. The fissure widened as he spoke, the earth answering his voice. A hollow sigh echoed upward from within, as though the mountain itself exhaled. He rose and entered, his wings folding close around him as he descended. The air grew thick, damp with the scent of forgotten rain. For days he walked downward, past veins of glowing crystal, past rivers that flowed without sound, past caverns where echoes hung like cobwebs. The deeper he went, the more the light dimmed, until only his own faint radiance lit the path. And then at last he reached the hollow. It was vast beyond measure, the world beneath the world. The ceiling shimmered faintly with minerals that caught even the smallest glint of light, making it look like a night sky buried within the earth. In the center lay a lake, so still it reflected his face perfectly. But the reflection was not his own. It was the face of something sleeping. He stepped closer. Beneath the water's surface, shadows moved. Slow, deliberate, immense. Limbs like roots, eyes like dull stars. They were not alive as men are alive. They were alive as mountains are alive, breathing once every 1,000 years. The watchers who had fallen deepest during the flood, the ones swallowed by the shifting continents, had not perished. They had turned into something else. Beings of stone and echo, their wings hardened into caverns, their faces carved into the mountain walls. They slept, but their dreams shaped the surface above. The watcher knelt by the water's edge.
"Brothers," he whispered, "does your sleep still remember light?"
The lake rippled. A voice rose from its depths. Slow, heavy, resonant as the earth moving. We do not dream of light. We dream of silence. He bowed his head. And in silence, what do you find? Peace and hunger. We remember the shape of the sky, but not the warmth of it. The watcher's heart ached. The sky still remembers you. The shadows shifted. A great eye opened beneath the water. Pale, faintly glowing, larger than any temple dome. It regarded him with weary recognition. "We know your voice, brother. You walked where we could not."
Tell us, does mercy still breathe?
He closed his eyes. Yes, but quietly, like wind after storm. The lake trembled with sound. "Then the world is safe from us for now." He looked upon them. These ancient sleepers who had become the marrow of the mountains, and saw that they were not evil. They were memory embodied, buried deep enough to dream without breaking the surface. "If you rise again," he said, "the world will break." "We will not rise," said the deep voice, "but our shadows will. For the breath within us moves even when we do not. The clay above us is restless." He frowned. "Restless?" "Yes. The dust has begun to walk strangely again."
It builds. It makes me hungry.
It listens to the same hum that called us once. The earth's song is changing. The watcher looked upward, as though seeing through layers of stone. Far above, he could almost hear it too. Faint, rhythmic, like the echo of the first thrones stirring once more. The same song that had led to every fall. He turned back toward the lake. "Then I will go to them." The eye closed. The water stilled. The voice faded to a whisper. "Go, but remember, even silence has roots." He bowed, spreading his wings wide in reverence. Then he turned and began the long ascent. Days passed as he climbed back toward the surface. The air grew lighter, the hum fainter, but it never disappeared. When he emerged from the fissure, the dawn was pale upon the horizon. The mountains glowed faintly in its light, as though their hearts still burned from within. The watcher stood upon the ridge, the wind tugging at his cloak. "You sleep," he murmured, "but your shadows wake." In the distance, smoke rose from the plains, thin black, curling toward heaven. The world above had begun to build again. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum that moved through earth and air alike. It was faint, but it was there, the first tremor of memory becoming prophecy once more. And beneath the mountains, deep below where no light could reach, the great sleepers turned in their dreams. The sound of their shifting rolled through the earth like thunder's ghost. The watcher lifted his face to the wind.
"Mercy," he whispered, "may you wake before they do."
The watcher lingered upon the high ridge for many days, watching the smoke from the plains curl into the horizon like black threads weaving into the sky. But it was not the smoke of war, not yet.
It was the smoke of buildings, of men reshaping the world with stones that remembered too much.
At night, when the wind turned cold, he could hear it. The faint murmur rising again from beneath the ground. It was not the hum of the thrones nor the whisper of the deep oceans. It was something slower, older, woven from the very bones of the world. The mountains were speaking. One evening, when the moon was thin and low, the watcher descended again into the valley between the peaks. There, in a hollow untouched by light, he found a cavern mouth ringed with obsidian, smooth, curved, unnaturally warm. The air that breathed from it smelled of rain and ash. He entered in silence. The walls glowed faintly with veins of crystal that pulsed like veins of a living thing. The deeper he walked, the more the pulse grew steady. 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, the heartbeat of the earth. And within that rhythm, a melody emerged. It was not sung by voice or wind, but by vibration, the music of the planet's own soul. The watcher closed his eyes and listened. The sound passed through his body like light through water, filling him with memory not his own. He saw the first shaping of the world, the divine breath moving through molten stone, carving rivers, lifting mountains. He saw the watchers standing at the edges of creation, their wings catching the sparks of dawn. He saw the moment when the first silence fell, when awe became separation, and creation learned to echo instead of sing. The song held all of it. It was not mournful, but complete, vast, cyclical, whole. It told of rises and falls, of fire and water, of mercy and pride woven into the same thread. It was the voice of the hollow earth, the memory beneath all memories. The watcher knelt upon the glowing floor.
"You remember everything," he whispered.
The mountain answered through the low hum of stone. "We remember what heaven forgets. We keep what water cannot hold." He bowed his head.
"Then tell me, what do you keep now?"
The dreams of the sleepers, the echoes of the thrones, the breath of the giants.
"And the promise that must be broken again."
He opened his eyes.
"Broken?"
All promises break when they are not remembered. The flood has faded from the minds of men. The covenant dims beneath their cities. The clay builds again. The watcher's wings trembled. And what of the mercy that was promised?
"Mercy sleeps until it is called."
But the world no longer prays, it commands. He stood slowly, looking toward the shimmering darkness ahead. The walls vibrated softly, showing faint patterns like waves in sand. As he watched, those patterns began to shift, scenes forming within them. He saw men carving mountains into palaces, digging deep into the earth to draw power from what should remain sealed. He saw fires that burned without wood, lights that moved without flame. And in those lights he saw the faint shimmer of familiar wings, the echoes of the Watcher's power being pulled again from the soil, from the stones, from the buried bones of giants.
"They are calling you back," he murmured.
The cavern pulsed brighter, almost like laughter. Low, sorrowful, vast.
"They call what they do not understand."
The song that made them still hums beneath their feet. Every tool they lift, every fire they spark, awakens the old sound. He took a step back. "Then the earth will awaken again." "No," said the voice, "not as before. Now it will awaken within them." The watcher felt the weight of those words settle upon him like falling dust. He saw in his mind the faces of men, workers, builders, dreamers, and within each one the same spark that once burned in the fallen. Memory is reborn not in temples or mountains, but in the human soul itself, he whispered. Then the hollow earth is not beneath her. It is within. The song deepened in tone, the crystals along the walls glowing in agreement.
"Yes, every heart is a chamber. Every soul is a mountain."
What sleeps below waits to rise above. Creation remembers itself through those who forget. He stood in awe.
"And what must I do?"
Do nothing. Watch. When the shadow becomes thought and the thought becomes light, you will know the time to speak again. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse slow, steady, gentle. The cavern song began to fade, retreating into the rock. Only one note lingered, soft, deep, eternal, the sound of the world breathing. When he emerged from the cave, dawn was breaking over the peaks. The air was thin and clear. Below, the valleys shimmered with mist. He could see the fires of men flickering faintly in the distance, small, fragile, and full of dreams. He spread his wings to the sun, whispering to the wind, "May their dreaming not become remembered." The wind, cool and patient, carried back the echo of the mountain's song. All dreaming is remembering, and all remembering becomes prophecy. The watcher lowered his gaze, the light of morning soft upon his face. He understood now that the story was not ending. It was beginning again. Not in the heavens, not in the depths, but in the hearts of those who had never heard the first silence, yet carried its echo in their blood. And far beneath his feet, deep within the hollow earth, the sleepers stirred again, not to rise, but to hum in harmony with the surface above. The world had become a single instrument tuned to the song of its own awakening. The watcher listened once more, and in the music of the deep he heard his own name woven faintly through the melody, as if the world itself were whispering, "Remember," softly. The Watcher walked among men once more. He no longer shone. His wings were folded into the shape of shadow, and his eyes, once lit by dawn, now reflected only the slow glow of embers. To the world, he was no more than an old traveller, a wanderer who listened more than he spoke. Yet every step he took trembled faintly with the song of the hollow earth beneath him. The plains were different now. Villages had risen from the dust, small at first, woven of wood, clay, and the fragile hope of beginning again. The people tilled their fields with songs, and their laughter carried through the air like soft bells. For a time, peace lived easily among them. But even peace, when left too long, becomes curiosity. And curiosity, as the Watcher knew, is the seed of remembering. One morning, a child found a shard of black stone buried near a riverbank. It was no larger than a hand, smooth and humming faintly. She brought it to her mother, who brought it to the village elder. The people gathered around it as it rested in the dust, faint warmth rising from its surface. "It is only rock," said one.
"No," said another.
"It listens." They kept it in the center of the village, where the sun struck it by day and the fire warmed it by night. They began to speak beside it, softly at first, as if telling stories to a sleeping god. Their words were simple: gratitude, hope, remembrance. But the stone absorbed every syllable, and slowly it began to hum. The Watcher, hearing it from miles away, closed his eyes. It has begun again. He arrived at dusk, the horizon painted in fading gold. The villagers welcomed him as a stranger, offering bread and water. He said nothing of who he was. That night, as they slept, he sat beside the shard and listened. The hum was faint, not wrathful, not proud. It sounded like breathing. When he touched it, a warmth moved through him that was not fire but memory. He saw flashes of the deep, the great sleepers stirring in their dreams, their songs seeping upward through the veins of the earth. The clay of man had begun to hear it. At dawn, the Watcher called the elders. "Do not feed it with words," he warned gently. "It remembers too easily."
One of them frowned.
"What is it?" He looked toward the mountains, whose peaks were veiled in pale light. "A piece of what once fell. It will awaken what sleeps within you." They did not understand.
How could they?
Days passed. The shard glowed faintly brighter each night. The children said it sang to them in their dreams, a voice like water calling them to listen. Some began to carve small stones like it, shaping them into circles and lines, setting them around the fields. The harvest grew faster, the rains came more often. The people said the stone had blessed them. The Watcher stayed among them, silent, heart heavy. He knew the truth. The earth blesses only for a time. Then it remembers its sorrow. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he sat with a young man who worked beside the shard each day. The man's eyes gleamed faintly in the twilight. "You fear it," he said. "I respect it," replied the Watcher. "It listens to me," the man continued. "When I touch it, I see things. Light under the mountains, wings of fire in the dark. It's as if something inside me knows its voice." The Watcher's face softened.
"Because it was once your voice."
The man frowned. "What do you mean?" "The clay that made you remembers the breath that gave you life. The same breath that shaped the first fires, the same light that fell and learned to love the dust. When you listen to the stone, it only reminds you of yourself. Then what harm is there in remembering?" The Watcher looked toward the distant peaks where clouds gathered like sleeping beasts, because remembrance without wisdom is the beginning of pride. That night the shard pulsed brighter than ever before. The villagers gathered, singing softly around it. The air grew warm, vibrating with sound. The Watcher stood apart, his eyes closed. Then the light burst forth, not in flame, but in shadowed radiance. A low tone rolled through the valley, deep and endless. The people fell silent. From the soil around them, faint threads of light rose, connecting the shard to the roots of trees, to the rivers, to their very heart. The Watcher felt it, the awakening of the clay. The earth beneath them had remembered itself. One by one, the people lifted their faces. Their eyes reflected starlight that was not from the sky. They began to speak, softly, then louder, then all at once. Words they did not understand, but that the world itself did. We are the dust that remembers. We are the breath that is forgotten. We are the children of silence. Their voices merged into harmony with the hum of the shard. The valley glowed as though dawn had come twice. The watcher fell to his knees, whispering, "Mercy, hold them!" And then as suddenly as it began, the light dimmed. The people fell silent, trembling. The shard cracked in two, its glow fading into ash. The wind swept softly through the fields, carrying away the last of its warmth. The villagers wept, not from sorrow, but from something deeper. They said they had seen their souls. They said they had remembered the first breath. The watcher rose, gazing toward the stars.
"Then the prophecy has begun," he murmured.
But the hollow earth has risen. Not through mountains, but through men. He left the valley that night, walking beneath constellations that shimmered faintly as though listening. The hum beneath the world had changed pitch, softer now, threaded with human voice. The clay had awakened. The breath was learning to sing again. The wind moved beside him, whispering, "The cycle turns once more." He nodded. "Yes, but perhaps this time they will remember without falling." The wind hesitated, then sighed. Even light must break to become dawn. And the watcher walked on into the darkness, carrying the quiet song of the awakening world in his heart. The same song that had shaped creation, lost heaven, drowned the earth, and now breathed once more through human lips. For the first time since the flood, the stars trembled, not in warning, but in wonder. In the generations after the shard cracked, the valley flourished. The rivers were kind, the crops generous, the nights peaceful. But peace, as always, carries its own decay. The hum beneath the world had softened, but it had not stopped. It had only found a new vessel. The memory that once burned in stone now whispered through the veins of men. At first no one noticed. Children were born with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Their laughter carried echoes that seemed to linger in the air. The elders said they were blessed, touched by the mercy of heaven. But the watcher, who walked among them unseen, knew the truth. The earth was speaking through them. One child, a boy named Aram, was the first to hear it clearly. He was quiet, solemn, often staring into the distance as though watching something behind the world. One night his mother found him standing in the field beneath the stars, his palms pressed to the soil. His lips moved, whispering words older than language. "What are you saying, my son?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes wide, shimmering with faint gold. "The ground is singing, mother. It knows my name." She held him close, trembling. "Do not say such things aloud." But he could not stop hearing it. The hum followed him everywhere, in the wind, in the rivers, in the beating of his own heart. He began to dream of wings, of mountains with eyes, of cities made of light buried beneath the sea. When he awoke, his hands glowed faintly, leaving patterns in the dust that shimmered before fading. The elders came to see him. Some said he was a prophet.
Others said he was cursed.
But when he spoke, their hearts still grew. His voice carried weight, as though the very air listened. "The earth remembers," he said softly, "and it is remembering us." The watcher stayed near the boy, hidden in the shadows, knowing what was coming. He had seen it before, the same light awakening in forms not meant to bear it. The flesh was too fragile for remembrance. When divine memory stirs within dust, it burns from the inside out. But this time, something was different. The light within the boy was gentler. Not pride, not hunger, but compassion. When he touched the sick, their pain faded. When he sang to the rivers, they cleared. The people began to follow him, calling him the child of the ground. The watcher revealed himself at last, cloaked in plain light, appearing before the boy as an old wanderer. "Do you know who speaks through you?" he asked. Aram tilted his head. "The ground." "And what does it say?" "That is tiring," said the boy, "that it has held too many memories, that it wants to rest, but it cannot because we keep waking it." The watcher knelt before him.
"And what will you do?" "I will sing it to sleep," the boy said.
The watcher's eyes shone with sorrow. "You are too young to bear such weight." The boy smiled faintly. "Then help me carry it." And so they walked together through the valleys and hills, the watcher and the child, like shadow and dawn. Everywhere I went, the earth quieted. The hum beneath the soil softened into rhythm, the same pulse that beat when the world was first made. But not everyone rejoiced. The elders feared him. They said no mortal should command the ground still. "He touches what is sacred," they whispered. "He calls the name of the deep." Fear spreads faster than faith. Soon the people who once knelt in gratitude began to tremble in suspicion. When storms came, and they always come, they blamed the boy. "He has awakened what should sleep," they said. "The flood returns through him." The watcher warned them. He is the earth's mercy, not its wrath. But his words were swallowed by the noise of their fear. One night they came to Aram with torches and stones. The watcher stood between them, wings outstretched, light trembling at their edges.
"Do not harm him," he said.
"He is what remains of your own prayer." But their hearts were deaf. They struck. The boy fell to his knees. The ground shuddered beneath him. The torches flickered blue. The people froze, for from his wound no blood fell.
Only light.
It spilled upon the soil like molten gold, sinking into the earth. The hum that had slept for centuries roared awake. The mountains trembled. The rivers rose. The stars above flared as though in pain. The watcher caught the boy in his arms, cradling him as the light pulsed through the valley. "Stay," he whispered. The boy smiled weakly. "The earth is quiet now." Then he was gone. The light did not fade.
It sank into the soil, spreading through roots and stone and bone, the whispering blood of the world renewed.
From that night onward, those who walked barefoot upon the land could feel it. A warmth, a heartbeat beneath their steps. The people wept in regret. They built no temples this time, no towers, no monuments. Instead, they left the valley untouched, a place of silence and wind. They said the ground there breathed softly, as if sleeping in peace. The watcher lingered a long while. Every dawn he could hear it faintly. The child's song moving through the dust, through the veins of creation. Not wrath, not judgment, lullaby. The whispering blood, he said softly. The memory was gentle. He turned his eyes toward heaven, where dawn shimmered pale and fragile. May they learn this time that power can rest without rising. And for a long moment the earth was still. But deep beneath the mountains the sleepers stirred once more, not in anger, but in curiosity. They had felt the boy's light pass through them like wind through roots. They whispered among themselves in voices of stone, "Perhaps the clay has learned." And for the first time in all the ages the hollow earth hummed not with sorrow, but with something like hope. The valley of the boy became sacred ground.
No walls were built there, no altar raised, no prayer carved into the stone. Only silence, vast, breathing eternal.
The people came not to worship, but to listen. The soil beneath their feet pulsed faintly, warm like the skin of a living thing. They said, if you knelt long enough, you could hear a heartbeat. Not the rhythm of the earth, but of something within it. Years turned to centuries. The story of the boy became legend, the legend became myth, and the myth became dust. Yet his blood, the whispering light that sank into the soil, did not fade. It moved like a slow river beneath the land, unseen, unfelt, but always flowing. It touched the roots of trees, and the trees grew tall and aware, their leaves shimmering faintly when the wind passed. It reached the rivers, and the waters began to glow softly under moonlight, as if remembering the touch of heaven. It even found the hearts of men. At first, it was only in dreams. A woman would wake in the night, hearing the earth sigh beneath her. A child would stand still in the field, eyes turned skyward, as though listening to something far away. Then one by one, Some began to change. They were not marked by strength or size as the Nephilim had been, but by stillness. Their eyes carried depths of memory that frightened even the wise. They spoke gently, but when they did, the air around them shifted. Birds stilled, fires quieted, hearts slowed. It was said that when one of them touched a wounded creature, the creature slept and dreamed itself whole again. They called them the children of the whispering blood, not kings, not prophets, just those who could hear what others could not. They were born everywhere, scattered across mountains and coasts, deserts and forests, never gathered, never known to one another. They carried within them the soft hum of the earth's secret pulse, though most never learned to name it. Some became poets, speaking in tongues that no book could hold. Some became healers. Some lived alone, speaking only to rivers or trees. The Watcher moved among them quietly, unseen, guiding where he could. He saw in them the first sign of mercy taking root within memory, the proof that the light of heaven could dwell within the clay without consuming it. But not all who carried the whisper kept it pure. Some heard the hum differently, darker, heavier. They felt power instead of peace. The same voice that soothed others drove them toward dominance. They learned to call storms with their words, to command beasts, to shape fire without flame. They believed themselves chosen not as healers, but as heirs of forgotten glory. The Watcher found one such man in the shadow of a ruined city, standing beside a river that ran red with clay. His name was Eremar, tall, sharp-eyed, his hands glowing faintly with the same golden light that once healed. "Why do you call the flood back?" the Watcher asked. Eremar turned. His smile was hollow. "Because the world sleeps too easily. I hear its pulse slowing. I will wake up again." "It does not need waking," said the Watcher. "It needs rest." Eremar's voice darkened. "Rest is for the dead. We are not made for silence. We are made for fire." The Watcher's heart sank. "You speak the same words as the first light that fell." Eremar stepped closer. "And perhaps I am its echo." He raised his hand toward the river. The waters bent, rising like glass, swirling in slow circles. The ground trembled.
"Do you feel it?" he asked.
"The world still remembers me. It remembers what we were." The Watcher reached forward, placing a hand upon Eremar's chest. The hum within him vibrated wildly, out of harmony with the earth. "You carry the song," the Watcher said softly, "but you have forgotten the rhythm." Eremar laughed, not in cruelty, but in grief. "You mistake stillness for peace, old one. The blood in me speaks too loudly to be silent." The air thickened. The river surged. The light around him flared, not golden now, but white, edged with black. The Watcher's wings unfurled, shimmering with sorrow. "Do not do this," he whispered. But the earth had already answered. The hum beneath them deepened, the mountains shuddering in reply. The whispering blood within Eremar's veins had found its twin in the hollow earth. And together they began to sing. The Watcher fell to his knees, pressing his palms to the soil.
"Mercy," he prayed.
Let the memory stay bound. The song grew louder, not of words, but of vibration, of energy made grief. The river burst its banks, turning to mist and light. The valley glowed as though the sun had fallen into it. Then, as quickly as it began, silence fell. Eremar was gone. Only the echo of his voice remained, carried on the wind like a secret prayer. "You cannot silence what was born to sing." The Watcher stood alone beside the quiet river. The water had turned clear again, its surface reflecting only the pale morning. He knew now that peace could never be permanent. The whispering blood, though merciful, was not harmless. It carried both melody and dissonance, as heaven always had. He looked upward, his voice soft. And this too must be part of remembering. And from somewhere deep within the earth, the faintest reply came, a hum, slow and sad. "Even mercy has its shadow." The Watcher walked on, his heart heavy but unbroken. He knew that the children of the whispering blood would continue to rise, some as healers, others as storms, each carrying a fragment of the same eternal song, one half peace, one half power. For that is what the earth had always been, a vessel for heaven's memory, still learning how to hold its own light without trembling. And as he vanished into the mist, the mountains behind him began to hum again, low, patient, eternal. The blood of the boy, the clay of man, the breath of the divine, all whispering in unison beneath the world. Long after Eramar vanished into light, the Watcher walked the quiet lands, and everywhere he went, he saw its shimmer. The whispering blood had spread like an unseen tide, threading itself through rivers, roots, and dreams. Though the mountains slept, their pulse echoed in the waters. Soft, rhythmic, steady. The people no longer feared the earth. They built their homes beside the rivers that glowed faintly at dusk, calling them the veins of the world. They said the water carried songs of healing, that if you listened long enough, you could hear voices beneath the current, not of men, but of the stars themselves. The Watcher would sit beside these rivers, his reflection older than time, and whisper to them as if to old friends. "You carry the memory kindly," he said one night, the moon painting the surface silver.
"But mercy, does it still breathe within you?"
The river answered in ripples, soft and melodic. "Mercy does not vanish. It only changes its current state." He smiled faintly, dipping his fingers into the cold water. Beneath the surface, threads of light coiled like veins of living gold. Each pulse carried the echo of the boy's last breath, the same song that had lulled the world back into peace. Yet beneath it, faint and persistent, he felt something new. A stirring, a question, a quiet yearning. Water remembers everything, but it never stays still. It moves, carrying even sorrow toward the sea. As the centuries passed, the rivers began to travel further than any before them. New lands awakened.
New people rose.
Some drank from the glowing streams and found wisdom in dreams. Others built altars upon their banks, carving shapes of wings and fire into stone. The Watcher moved among them unseen, whispering into their hearts the same soft warning. Do not worship the water.
Listen to it.
But few remembered how to listen. One night, while walking through a valley where the river split into 7 paths, the Watcher found a child standing barefoot upon the shore. Her eyes shone with the same faint light he had seen once before, the quiet glow of the whispering blood. She looked up at him and smiled. "You came late," she said, as if she had been waiting. He knelt before her. "Who are you?" "The river's daughter," she said simply.
"I was born when it dreamed of light."
He studied her, her calm, her stillness, the way the air around her seemed to hum in harmony. "Do you hear its song?" She nodded. "It speaks of return." Return of what? She touched the water with her small hand, and the surface shimmered like glass. Of the ones who fell, not in wrath, but in longing. The river remembers them, wants to carry them home. The Watcher's heart trembled. The river cannot carry heaven back into earth. The child smiled gently. It doesn't need to.
Heaven is already in the water.
The current brightened, its glow deepening from silver to gold. The hum beneath the earth grew stronger, resonating with the river's pulse. Across the valley, lights began to bloom where the water touched soil. Tiny, luminous blossoms, breathing faintly like stars fallen to rest. The Watcher whispered, "The flood returns, but not in destruction." The girl stood, her hair stirred by the wind. "It comes as remembrance. The water carries all voices now, and are yours, mine, theirs." She pointed toward the mountains, even those who sleep. Far away, thunder rolled, not of storm, but of awakening. The great mountains pulsed with faint light, their veins glowing as though molten gold flowed within. The hollow earth was stirring again, not to rise in rebellion, but to join the song above. The Watcher lifted his gaze. "Then the whole world sings. The child nodded. The river is teaching it how. They stood together upon the banks as the waters began to move faster, glowing brighter, weaving through valleys and forests like ribbons of living fire. Where they flowed, trees blossomed out of season, stones grew warm to the touch, and even the air carried a fragrance that felt like prayer. People came from far away, following the shining river. They knelt beside it, dipped their hands, and felt warmth move through their veins. For a time, peace reigned again, not as silence, but as music. But even peace, when it lasts too long, begins to hunger for meaning. Men built shrines once more. They carved faces into the cliffs, faces that looked upward as if pleading with the sky. They began to speak of the river of returning light as though it were divine, forgetting that divinity was never water. It was remembrance. The watchers sighed. They build where they should listen. The child, now older, her eyes wiser, turned to him.
Let 'em.
Even forgetting is part of remembering. The water will teach them again. He looked down into the current, seeing his own reflection ripple and fade. And what will you do?
I will follow it, she said softly, until it meets the sea. The sea is deep, said the watcher.
It holds what even light cannot reach, she smiled. Then I will teach the sea to sing. And she walked away, barefoot along the glowing banks, her figure small against the immensity of the world. The watcher watched her until she disappeared into the horizon, a thread of light walking beside a river that remembered everything. When night fell, he sat once more upon the shore listening. The water moved with a new rhythm now, higher, brighter, carrying both sorrow and joy. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in ages he felt something rise within him. Hope. The light returns, he whispered, but this time not as judgment.
As promised.
The river's voice rose with the wind, soft as prayer, sure as prophecy. All things return. All light remembers its source.
Even the stars will find their way home.
The watcher opened his eyes. The world shimmered beneath the moon, each ripple of water reflecting the breath of heaven. He smiled, tired, luminous, eternal. And far away, where the rivers met the unseen sea, the light sank quietly below the surface, carrying with it the song of creation renewed. The river of returning light had begun its journey home. Beneath the veil of waves, where sunlight fades into memory, there lies a world untouched by time. No man has seen it, yet every dream of peace has drawn its shape. A vast and living garden, woven of coral and silence, breathing in rhythm with the heart of the sea. It is said that this place was born when the flood withdrew. The remnants of heaven's light that sank with the giants, seeds of mercy buried in the salt. Over ages beyond counting, those seeds began to grow, nourished not by warmth or wind, but by remembrance. The waters above became a sky of their own, and the seabed became a new earth. Soft, luminous, patient, the watcher came to it at last. He descended through layers of blue and shadow, where no light should have lived, yet light waited still. Slow, deliberate, alive. The deeper he went, the more the water seemed to breathe, exhaling in slow pulses that moved through him like heartbeat and hymn. When his feet touched the ocean floor, the world glowed around him. Forests of coral rose like cathedrals, their branches spiraling toward the unseen heavens. Fishes of translucent gold drifted through the currents like thoughts unspoken. Between them, strange flowers bloomed, not of petals, but of light, unfolding in rhythm with the song of the deep. And at the center of it all, there stood the tree. Its trunk was of living crystal, its roots spreading wide through the seabed, pulsing faintly with the same light that had once filled the thrones. Its branches reached upward into the dark, bearing no leaves, only small spheres of shimmering memory. fragments of every voice that had ever prayed, every song that had ever sought forgiveness. The watcher knelt before it, his heart trembling.
"So this is where the flood went," he whispered.
Not to destroy, but to plant. The sea stirred, and a voice moved through the currents. Vast, feminine, ancient. Even judgment becomes mercy when it rests long enough in silence. He bowed his head.
"Then this is mercy's root."
"It is remembrance made whole," the sea replied. "What was lost above took root below. The fallen light did not vanish. It learned to grow in shadow." The watcher walked among the glowing roots. Each pulse carried memory. Scenes of mountains, deserts, towers, and rivers, all flowing within the same rhythm. He reached out and touched one, and the vision came alive. The boy of the whispering blood, kneeling in the field of dawn. The woman of the temples, singing to the black stone. The child of the rivers, walking beside the light. All of them are threads of the same divine remembering, all of them leading here, to the quiet beneath the sea. He looked upward through the miles of water, toward the dim outline of the surface.
"Above they have forgotten this peace."
The sea's voice replied gently, "That is why we keep it for them. Every prayer that drowns finds its way here.
Every tear becomes a seed.
And one day, when they are ready to remember softly, the garden will rise." "Rise?" asked the watcher. "Will the sea give up its mercy?"
"Mercy does not belong to one realm," said the sea.
"It flows where it is needed. The garden was never meant to remain hidden forever." He stood in awe. "Then even the depths have their dawn." "Yes," the sea murmured. "And when it comes, it will not burn. It will bloom." The watcher stepped closer to the tree. Its roots pulsed stronger, recognizing the light within him.
"Do you remember me?" he whispered.
"We remember all who wept," said the voice of the sea, "even angels who mourned what they could not mend." He closed his eyes, and for a moment he felt the ocean cradle him, the same way the wind had once held him before the first fall.
"Then I am forgiven?"
"You were never condemned," said the sea, "only learning." He bowed low, tears dissolving into the water. "Then let this place sleep until the world above remembers to love without reaching." The sea fell silent, but its light brightened, the coral shimmering, the currents trembling like breath. For a moment, the watcher thought he heard laughter. Not of joy, but of rest. He turned to leave, walking through the radiant forest. The creatures of the deep followed him for a time, their movements slow and reverent, until he rose beyond their reach. As he ascended through the quiet blue, the light of the garden dimmed below him, fading into a soft glow that pulsed like a heart beneath the world. At the surface, the watcher emerged beneath a sky heavy with stars. The moon lay upon the sea like a coin of silver. He looked down, and the reflection shimmered, not with his face, but with the faint outline of the tree. He smiled faintly. Even buried light finds its way upward. The wind answered, moving gently across the waves. The sea remembers. The garden waits. He turned toward the horizon, where the rivers met the ocean. The same water, now reborn, carrying memory between realms. He whispered into the night, "Then I will wait with it." And so he walked along the shore, the tide touching his feet, the rhythm of creation still echoing through his heart. Soft, eternal, unending. The sea had slept for 1,000 years. Its currents had moved softly, its gardens had glowed faintly, and the tree of the deep had kept its quiet vigil, cradling every memory that had fallen from the world above.
But mercy cannot sleep forever. Even peace, when left too long in stillness, begins to ache for movement, for return.
It began with a shimmer. A single pulse of light ran through the roots of the tree, moving outward like a heartbeat felt through miles of silence. The coral forest swayed in unison. The fish turned in slow spirals, forming patterns older than the stars. The watcher, walking the shores of a distant
Land felt it immediately.
The tide paused mid-breath. The waves drew back as if listening. Beneath his feet, the sand quivered faintly with the rhythm of the deep. He turned toward the horizon and whispered, "You're waking." From the depths came a sound, soft, low, impossible, the song of the sea. It rose like wind through water, like prayer through breath. The watcher fell to his knees, his hands pressed into the earth. The very soil hummed with it. Far below, the tree began to bloom. From its crystal trunk unfolded tendrils of light, thousands of them, each a memory made flesh, each carrying the scent of dawn. They rose upward, weaving through coral and current, trailing brightness wherever they passed. And at the end of each tendril bloomed a flower, not of color, but of meaning. Some sang of loss, some of forgiveness, some of love so deep it became silence itself. The sea glowed as if a new sun had been born beneath it. The creatures of the deep gathered around the tree in reverence, their forms outlined in radiance. The whales sang, their low voices harmonizing with the current's hum. Even the sleeping leviathans opened their ancient eyes, not in rage, but in awe. The watcher closed his eyes, tears glimmering.
"This is not destruction," he whispered.
"This is resurrection." The light from the deep pierced the surface in narrow beams. The ocean reflected them into the sky, painting the clouds in soft gold. Sailors upon distant waters stopped their ships and fell silent, thinking the heavens had split open. In truth, it was not heaven descending, it was mercy rising. And through it all the tree sang. Its voice was not one sound, but many. The echoes of all that had been lost returning in harmony. The song passed through the water, through the soil, through the wind. It reached mountains that had forgotten the flood. It reached the sleeping watchers in the hollow earth, stirring them in their rest. And it reached the hearts of men, quiet, unseen, but felt. Some awoke from sleep with tears upon their faces, unable to name why. Some dropped their tools mid-labor and stood in silence, hearing faint music in the wind. Some fell to their knees, their hearts trembling with the same forgotten awe that once filled the world before language began. It was as if the entire earth remembered for a single breath that it had once been loved into being. The watcher stood upon the shore until dawn broke. The horizon burned with colors unseen before, not red or orange, but hues that seemed made from memory and light. "The tree blooms," he whispered, "and the world breathes again." Then the sea spoke, not in words, but in waves. The tide rose and kissed the shore with a warmth like hands. Within its foam, fragments of light shimmered, glowing for a moment before sinking back into the deep. He listened, and the meaning unfolded within him. The bloom is not the end. It is the remembering of beginnings. He bowed his head. Then the garden was never meant to be hidden forever. The sea's voice sighed through the surf. Nothing that holds love stays buried. Even the depths must flower. Days passed, and the light beneath the waters did not fade. It spread. The glow of the deep reached new shores, touching every ocean and river. The tree's song wove itself into the rain, so that when it fell, it carried whispers of the deep garden to every corner of the earth. The soil drank it. The rivers hummed. The roots of trees began to tremble with distant light.
Even the stars, watching from their silent thrones, flickered as though remembering what they were. Fragments of the same divine breath that shaped both heaven and sea.
The watcher wandered from shore to shore, following the bloom's reflection upon the waves. Wherever he went, people looked upon him with quiet awe. They said his eyes carried the color of the ocean before dawn. They said he spoke like a tide and storm, though his words were few. He never told them who he was. He only asked one question to those who would listen. "When you drink from the rain, do you remember who sent it?" Some would nod, some would not understand, but he smiled either way. The remembering had already begun. Beneath the surface, the tree's flowers began to fall. Each petal of light drifted downward, dissolving into the soil of the deep. From each, a new root grew, smaller, softer, but carrying the same pulse. The garden expanded, its song spreading through every hidden current, every secret cavern. The sea whispered one last time before falling silent. When the last flower reaches the surface, the world above will be ready to dream again. The watcher looked across the endless horizon. The light upon the waves shimmered like a promise waiting to be kept. "Then let it rise when the hearts of men are gentle enough to hold it," he said. And the sea, content, returned to its stillness, glowing softly beneath the stars, guarding the garden that bloomed in the dark. Above the dawn spread like a prayer, not shouted, not commanded, but whispered, and for a moment that could have been eternity, heaven, earth, and sea breathed as one. There are nights when the sea forgets to hide its heart, when the wind falls still and the tide rises without warning, not in rage, but in longing. Those who live upon the coast say they can hear it on such nights, a song too soft to frighten, too ancient to ignore. It was on one such night that the watcher stood again by the shore. The sky was without the moon, and the stars hung low as if listening. The sea lay still, black as ink, but beneath its surface a faint light pulsed, slow, rhythmic, alive. The bloom of the tree had not ended. It had reached its final hour. He waited. The air grew heavy. The world itself seemed to lean toward the water, holding its breath. Then the sea began to speak, not in words, not in sound, but in a vibration that trembled through everything: sand, wind, flesh, soul. The watcher's bones remembered it before his mind did. The same frequency that shaped the first mountains, that bound light to dust, now moved through creation again. The surface of the ocean shimmered, and from its center rose a column of light. It was not fire, nor lightning, nor the false brilliance of stars. It was remembrance, condensed, concentrated, singing. The voice within it was vast, neither male nor female, but woven of every whisper ever uttered in prayer. It carried no command, no anger, only the weight of being known. "Do you remember me?" it asked. The words passed, not through the ear, but through the heart. The watcher fell to his knees, the waves curling around him like hands.
"I never forgot," he said.
The sea's light shimmered. "And why does the world still tremble?" He bowed his head. "Because remembering is heavy, and yet you still carry it."
"I must."
The light moved closer, its reflection dancing across his face. "Tell me what the earth has learned." He hesitated. "That even silence has a voice, that even dusk can pray. That love, when buried, does not die. It waits." The water swelled around him, glowing brighter. And has it learned not to rise against the hand that made it? He looked upward, the stars mirrored in his eyes. Not yet, but it has learned to weep. For a long moment the sea was silent. Then the light dimmed, softening into warmth that spread across the horizon. Weeping is the beginning of wisdom. He breathed deeply, the salt air filling his chest. "Then the world still has hope."
"Hope never left," the sea replied.
It was only drowned in noise. The watcher stood. The light brushed against his wings and they flared briefly, scattering droplets of gold into the night. "Then why speak now after so long?" The sea's voice rippled through him. "Because the garden has bloomed, and its fragrance has reached the heavens. The silence between us is ending." He felt the truth of it. In the air, in the tide, in the trembling of the ground. The same hum that once sang through the stones of the thrones now hummed again through the oceans and hearts of men. It was softer now, tempered by sorrow and time, but it was there. The divine conversation resumed. "Will you walk among them again?" the watcher asked quietly. "I never stopped." The water rose, and within the light he saw faces, countless faces, of those who had lived and died, carrying fragments of the old memory. The boy with the whispering blood, the woman of the temples, the child of the rivers. All their reflections swirled together, merging into one endless tapestry of light. "I am every memory that is forgiven," said the voice.
Every silence that waited.
Every breath that did not curse the dark. The watcher wept openly now, his tears mingling with the tide. And all this time we were never alone. The sea's light flickered gently.
Aloneness is the illusion of impatience.
Eternity always answers, Yadampo, but it answers slowly. He laughed softly through his tears. Then I will wait as the sea waits.
And when you grow tired?
Then I will listen to its song until I remember why I began. The light trembled, as if smiling. Good. The sea began to withdraw, its glow sinking once more into the depths. The waves folded back into themselves, leaving only a faint shimmer upon the horizon. But the watcher could still feel it. The voice echoing in his chest, the same pulse that had shaped stars and rivers alike. Before it vanished completely, the sea whispered one final phrase, so gentle it could have been mistaken for wind. When they forget again, and they will, tell them this: the light does not return from heaven. It rises from the water, and with that the sea fell silent once more. The watcher remained upon the shore until dawn. The tide crept close again, cool and tender. He whispered into it, "Then I will wait here, by the edge of memory." The water lapped at his feet as though answering, "And I will keep the song." Above him the stars faded into the pale blue of morning. The world looked new, not because it was reborn, but because it had remembered what it once was, a place where heaven could hide in every drop of rain, and where mercy could speak through water. The watcher closed his eyes, breathing the sea's last echo, and in that breath the ocean sang,
Once the sky was the memory of God. Every star was a verse, every constellation a prayer written in flame.
The heavens were never empty. They breathed, they watched, they listened. But as the ages passed and the light of the sea rose toward them, the stars grew quiet. Their song, the first and purest music, began to fade. The watcher wandered far from the sea, climbing into the highlands where clouds slept upon the shoulders of mountains. There the air was thin, and silence had a different texture. Sharp, echoing, vast. He stood beneath the endless dome of heaven and looked upward, his heart aching. The stars shone cold and distant, their brightness hollow. They had forgotten how to speak. He whispered to them, his voice barely more than breath. "Do you remember the sound of your own fire?" No answer came. Only the slow turning of the firmament. Patient, eternal, deaf. Once he would have heard them. Their trembling voices woven through the winds of creation, their light pulsing with the rhythm of the divine heart. But now even the stars seemed weary. He sank to his knees. The ground was brittle here, scattered with ancient stones that once formed an altar. Their surfaces were smooth, polished by centuries of prayer. He touched them gently, feeling the faint hum of the earth below. Still alive, still singing. "Even the soil remembers," he murmured, "but the sky has forgotten." A voice moved behind him, soft, familiar, woven with wind. "The heavens cannot forget. They only wait to be answered." He turned. Standing at the edge of the cliff was a woman cloaked in pale blue, her hair dark as midnight, her eyes filled with starlight. She looked neither mortal nor divine, but something between, like the pause between inhaling and exhaling. "Who are you?" asked the watcher. She smiled faintly. "A keeper of the night, a memory of what the stars once were." "Stars had no need of keepers," he said. "They were light itself."
"And yet," she said softly, "light too can grow tired of being worshipped."
Her gaze lifted toward the heavens. They burned for too long without rest. Their prayers were answered only by silence, and so they learned to dim themselves. They forgot how to sing, not because they were forsaken, but because they began to listen. The watcher frowned. "Listen to what?"
"To the earth," she said.
"To the rivers, to the wind, to the heartbeat of things that were once beneath them. When the light fell, heaven listened, but it has not yet understood what it hears. The watcher stepped closer, his voice trembling. Then the silence above is not death? She shook her head slowly.
No, it is contemplation.
He exhaled, the weight in his chest easing. And there is still hope. Always, she said. But hope, like starlight, travels slowly. The wind stirred around them, carrying the scent of snow and rain. The woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of constellations. The stars are not gone. They are waiting to be named again. He bowed his head. Names are heavy things. She smiled. Yes, but when spoken with love, even a heavy name can rise. The watcher looked up once more. The stars flickered faintly, as if hearing the echo of their own forgotten melody. He felt it then. The faint vibration that had once tied heaven to earth, now weakened, but not lost. He spread his arms, his voice rising with the wind. Then listen, O forgotten sky. The world still remembers you. His words rippled outward, unseen but felt. The woman closed her eyes, whispering along with him, and the air shimmered faintly between them. The mountains hummed, the rivers stirred, the sea far away answered with a pulse of light.
And in the vastness above, one star brightened, just a fraction, just enough to be seen.
The watcher fell silent, his breath caught in awe. It was heard. The woman nodded. Light never dies. It only waits for an echo. He looked at her. Then you are that echo. She smiled sadly.
For now, until they remember how to sing again.
Her form began to shimmer, dissolving into mist and starlight. When the sky forgets its light, it must be reminded by those who walk beneath it. And what must I do? He asked. Her voice lingered in the wind, soft and clear. Speak gently to the dark. It has been lonely for too long. And she was gone. The watcher stood alone upon the mountain. Above him, the sky stretched infinite and silent, yet no longer cold. Somewhere within that vast stillness, something stirred. Faint, like the first breath before a song. He lifted his face toward it, his voice no more than a whisper. Then sing when you are ready.
I will be listening. A single star pulsed brighter, then another.
The heavens trembled with memory, slow but sure. Far below, the seas answered with ripples of light. The rivers sang softly, and the earth breathed in rhythm once more. For the first time since the first fall, the sky and the sea remembered each other, and between them stood the watcher, the last bridge between silence and sound, listening, waiting, weeping in quiet joy. For many nights after the woman of the blue cloak vanished, the watcher lingered upon the mountain. He did not sleep. He listened. He let the silence of the heavens fill him until it no longer felt empty, but expectant, like the stillness before dawn, when light hides behind the breath of creation. The sky above him had changed. It was no longer the cold indifference of distance, but something fragile, tired, waiting. The stars flickered faintly, their edges dim, their centers pulsing in slow rhythm. They looked like lanterns forgotten after a feast, still burning because they did not know they could rest. The weary stars, the watcher whispered.
Even glory grows old.
He stretched his wings toward them, though their light could not reach him. Do you remember the day you were born? He asked softly. Sound that made you? The breath that called you flame? The heavens quivered. The faintest shimmer rippled across the night, a sigh of starlight too soft for any mortal to see. The watcher felt it move through him, sorrow, deep and ancient. He closed his eyes, listening closer. In the hum beneath the silence, he heard what few could ever hear, the prayer of the stars themselves. We shine, they whispered, but we no longer know why. The watcher fell to his knees, because you were the first memory of light. You were the eyes of mercy in the dark. The wind stirred gently around him, carrying the faint sound of that celestial sigh.
Well, we're tired, they said.
We have burned too long without a voice. The earth has her rivers, the sea her song, but we have only distance. He looked upward, tears glimmering. Then let me be your echo. I have walked the earth and heard its song.
I've stood by the sea and felt its remembering.
Let me carry your sorrow back to them. The stars dimmed, their glow faltering, then strengthening again, like breathing. And what of you, Watcher? You who have listened to all things? Where do you belong? He smiled faintly. Between them, between silence and sound, between heaven that forgets and earth that remembers. For a moment the sky stilled, and then, faintly, a note rose. Not from the Watcher, not from wind or wave, but from the stars themselves. It was not loud.
It did not blaze.
It trembled like the voice of someone learning to speak again after centuries of silence. The Watcher held his breath. The note grew stronger, weaving through the night like a single thread of light. Other stars caught it, hesitantly at first, then willingly, joyfully. One by one they began to hum. The heavens were singing again. It was not the grand song of creation, not the thunder that once shaped galaxies, but a softer melody. Humble, fragile, human, the stars had learned from the earth's patience, from the sea's forgiveness. Their song now carried sorrow and gentleness, the kind that only comes from having loved too long. The Watcher wept openly. He spread his wings wide, his voice joining theirs, not to lead, but to harmonize. The night filled with their song, a sound that flowed downward into the valleys, stirring rivers, waking sleepers who dreamed of light they could not name. In distant lands, shepherds looked upward and whispered, "The stars are crying." But it was not sorrow. It was released. The heavens were remembering. After a while the melodies softened. The stars dimmed again, not from exhaustion, but from peace. Their hum faded into the rhythm of wind and tide. The Watcher remained upon the mountain, the echo of their song still trembling in his chest. He whispered, "You have sung yourselves home." A voice answered, not from the sky, but from within his heart. Home is where remembering becomes rest. He bowed his head. Then rest well, O lights. The heavens shimmered once more, a gentle nod of radiance. Then the stars grew still, their fire steady, their silence soft. For the first time since the first dawn, the sky did not feel distant. It felt near. The Watcher stood and looked upon the world below. Rivers glowed faintly, mountains breathed mist, and the seas reflected the softened starlight like a mirror of mercy. Heaven and earth were no longer strangers. They had learned to weep together, and in their tears found harmony. He turned his gaze upward one last time. "Your song will find them," he said. "Even when clouds hide your face, your light will teach them how to pray." The wind rose behind him, cool and tender. "And who will teach you?" it asked. He smiled, closing his eyes. The silence. For silence had been his teacher since the beginning. The stillness before creation, the quiet between the first word and its echo. He spread his wings, stepping into the wind, his body dissolving into light and breath. As he ascended, the stars brightened once more, as though recognizing one of their own returning. The Watcher's light joined theirs, not as flame, but as reflection, woven into the quiet tapestry of night. And when men looked upward for centuries to come, they would see a single, gentle star burning lower than the rest, near the horizon, where sea and sky meet. They would call it the Listener, and though they would not know why, they would feel peace in its light. There comes a moment before every sunrise when the world forgets which way time moves. The night does not end, the day does not begin. Both linger, touching gently like hands in prayer. In that sacred pause the world holds its breath. That is where the Watcher lived now, not among the stars, not upon the earth, but in the narrow passage between them, where the last dream fades and the first word of light is spoken. He no longer bore the weight of wings or voice. He was a breath, a shimmer, a listening ear. From his new place on the horizon, he could see everything at once. The sea below still pulsing with memory, the mountains sleeping like the ribs of old angels, the rivers glowing faintly, carrying whispers from valley to valley, and above them the weary stars at peace, still humming softly. It was the first dawn after remembering. The sky blushed pale gold, and the light of morning touched the edge of the sea. For a moment, everything shimmered as one, heaven and earth, star and stone, water and wind. The same pulse, the same breath, the same ancient word that began it all. The watcher's voice, now made of light, spoke softly into that stillness. Let it not be forgotten again. The wind carried his words downward. It passed through the forests and rivers, over the faces of those still sleeping. They stirred. They dreamed of wings. In a small village by the sea, a child awoke and ran to the shore. The tide was low and the sand shimmered faintly, glowing with soft blue light. She looked up, and there, just above the horizon, was a star burning low and gentle. It did not fade with the rising sun. She smiled, whispering, "The sky remembers." Far across the oceans, in a land of mountains, a shepherd raised his face to the dawn and saw the same light. Though he did not know its name, he felt its warmth move through him, as if someone, somewhere, had forgiven him without words.
And in the deep places of the earth, the sleepers stirred once more, not to rise, but to listen.
For the dawn between worlds had reached them too. The song of the heavens travelled through stone and soil, weaving through their dreaming heart. In their sleep they smiled. Above the waters the sea exhaled, long, slow, content. The waves glowed faintly as they met the shore, leaving behind trails of light that faded with the tide. The tree beneath the ocean shone quietly, its roots humming in harmony with the sky. And then something new happened. The stars did not vanish as the sun rose. They lingered faintly, hidden behind the daylight, refusing to disappear. The heavens had learned to share their light. The watcher felt it in every particle of his being. Creation was remembering unity. The divisions that once tore heaven from earth were thinning, the veil growing transparent. The morning unfolded like scripture written in color. Clouds glowed like opened scrolls, and the light that touched the mountains seemed to carry meaning, as though every ray was a verse spoken by God to his creation. For the first time, dawn did not belong to the sun. It belonged to the in-between, to the memory of what heaven and earth once were when they were one breath. The watcher's light hovered over the horizon. His voice, or what remained of it, drifted downward, softer than wind. Every shadow is a remnant of dawn. Every silence is a waiting song. The world listened, the rivers still, the winds bowed. Even the hearts of men, unaware yet touched, felt the weight of peace settle within them. Heaven and earth no longer spoke in thunder or flood. They spoke in stillness. In that stillness, understanding was born. The stars, though dim in the morning light, whispered among themselves. He still listens. He has become our dawn. And the sun, rising over the edge of the sea, seemed gentler that day, as though remembering that it was never meant to outshine the stars, only to carry their flame into the hours of men. The watcher saw it all. The trembling of light upon water, the slow bloom of warmth across the sky, the hearts of the living awakening to a peace they could not name. He whispered one last prayer, so quiet that only the sea heard. Let this remembering be their rest. The sea replied in a sigh that spanned the world. Rest is remembering made whole. And the horizon burned softly with gold. The day began, but it began differently. Not as escape from night, but as its continuation, as if light itself had learned mercy. The watcher, now the star that never faded, lingered in that threshold, holding the space where heaven could still meet earth. He no longer needed to speak. The dawn was his voice, And from that day forward, every morning carried a memory of that peace. The wind over oceans, the shimmer of dew, the hush before birdsong, all of it was him, whispering to a world that had forgotten how to fall asleep in faith and wake in awe. And though ages would pass and men would again build towers, break silence and chase their reflections in flame, somewhere, hidden in each dawn, the watcher's light would burn low and faithful, reminding them gently, "You are not lost, you are only remembering." The dawn had come and gone countless times. Each morning rose softer than the one before, and each night fell gentler. The world no longer feared its shadows. It had learned to sleep with them. The rivers sang slower songs now, and the mountains stood like old friends, weary but kind.
Only the horizon had not changed. That fragile edge where light is born and dies every day.
There, between heaven and earth, the watcher still shone, not as fire, but as a steady, remembering glow. He had become the hinge of time, the keeper of balance.
Every sunrise passed through him. Every sunset carried his breath.
The sea whispered to him. The stars bowed to him.
Even the silence of creation bent around his light.
Yet, within him, a new quiet was growing, a stillness that was not peace, but completion. He felt it one morning as the first light crept over the waters. The hum beneath the world, that sacred thread connecting sky, sea, and soul, began to slow. The pulse of creation, steady for ages, softened like the heartbeat of one falling into deep sleep. The watcher lifted his gaze to the heavens.
"Is it time?"
he whispered. The sky did not answer in thunder, it answered in warmth. The air around him brightened, golden and calm. From the east, the first ray of the sun reached across the water and touched his light. And for the first time in eternity, the horizon shimmered in both directions, dawn and dusk meeting as one. He smiled. Then the circle closes. The wind moved across the surface of the sea, carrying a voice he had known since the beginning, the same that spoke before stars were born. "You have listened long enough, child of silence. It is time to rest." He bowed his head. "Have I done well?" You remembered when the world forgot. You waited when the heavens grew weary. You were light when even the light fell silent.
"That is enough."
The watcher's heart trembled with joy and sorrow entwined. "And what becomes of me now?" The voice was soft, like a wave touching sand. "You return to the breath that first called you. You will no longer be the listener. You will be the song." He closed his eyes. "Then let me sing one last time." And the horizon obeyed. The colors of the sky began to melt. Gold into rose, rose into violet, violet into deep indigo. The sea reflected every hue, until it seemed the world itself was being painted anew. The watcher's light brightened, expanding beyond the line of dawn. Every creature that breathed felt it. The birds paused in their flight. The rivers hushed. The sleeping beasts stirred. Even the winds folded their wings. For a moment, all things stilled, as if listening for the final note of a song that had begun before memory. And he sang. It was not sound as mortals know it. It was the resonance of peace, the vibration of forgiveness, a song without melody, yet carrying every melody within it. He sang of the flood that became mercy. He sang of the stones that learned to dream. He sang of the boy whose blood whispered life back into the dust. He sang of the rivers, of the garden beneath the sea, of the weary stars that found their rest. And then he sang of silence, the first silence, the one that began before all beginning. The song rose through the air and the water, weaving through the roots of mountains, through the chambers of the hollow earth, through the hidden places where the divine breath still lingered. Every echo, every fragment of memory joined it, the voices of angels, the sighs of men, the laughter of rivers, the hum of stones. For a heartbeat beyond time, creation sang as one. The light of the watcher grew brighter, no longer golden but white. the color of completion, of returning. The horizon dissolved into his glow, and the sea mirrored the sky perfectly. There was no up, no down, only one endless field of light breathing in rhythm, and from within it came the voice. Vast, tender, infinite. Rest now.
You have brought them home.
The watcher's form began to dissolve. His wings unfurled one final time, their feathers turning to radiant dust that scattered across the wind. His eyes, filled with dawn, dimmed into peace. Before his last breath of light faded, he whispered, "Will they remember?" The voice replied, "Yes. Every morning that rises they will call it by another name, but it will always be you." And then he was gone. The horizon remained, glowing faintly, pulsing softly with his echo. The sun rose through it, warm and quiet, and every ray that touched the earth carried his memory. The seas sighed in gratitude, the mountains bowed in shadow, and in the hearts of all who lived, a single phrase lingered without words. A knowing, gentle and vast. The listener still listens, for the watcher had not ended. He had become the dawn itself, the soft bridge between heaven's silence and earth's longing, forever rising, forever remembering. And when night falls each day, and the sky darkens once more, the first star that appears near the horizon glows faintly, as though whispering to the world that all beginnings are simply endings returning home. When the watcher's light dissolved into the horizon, the world did not mourn. It listened. The first dawn after his farewell was unlike any before it. The air shimmered faintly, and the earth exhaled as though relieved of a weight it had forgotten it carried. The rivers moved more gently. Their waters gleamed with subtle warmth. Even the wind had changed. Slower, softer, woven with music too quiet for the unlistening to hear.
That music was him.
Not his voice, not his form, but his being. It began as a vibration beneath the soil, moving through root and stone, threading itself into every hidden chamber of creation. Trees swayed to it, their leaves quivering like strings touched by unseen hands. Birds paused in mid-flight, adjusting their wings to its rhythm. Every living thing in its own way began to hum. It was not a song that asked to be sung. It was a song that remembered itself through the breathing of the world. In the deep sea, the coral garden glowed again, pulsing faintly in time with the dawn above. The great tree beneath the water opened its luminous flowers once more, though now their light rose upward. Soft, golden, endless. Each bloom carried a fragment of the watcher's final note, sending it through the waves, into rivers, into rain. And when that rain fell upon the land, it was not cold. It carried warmth, and every drop shimmered as if it held a whisper. Those who walked through it swore they heard words they could not understand. Yet the sound made their hearts still and their breath slow, as though creation itself was reminding them, peace is not something you find.
It is what you are made from.
In a village by the river, a blind old woman felt the rain touch her face. She smiled and said aloud, "He has come back." In a distant desert, a wanderer woke from sleep and heard the sand hum beneath him. He wept without knowing why. Across mountains, across valleys, the unseen song wove itself through everything that still had a name. Even those who had forgotten how to pray found themselves humming under their breath, softly, involuntarily, the same ancient rhythm that had shaped the world before it was divided by day and night. For this was not the watcher's farewell, it was his becoming. The song that never ends does not need memory to survive. It lingers in the very structure of being, in the turn of the tide, the arc of a leaf, the beat of a newborn's heart. It hides in the quiet between words, in the exhale after laughter, in the space between stars. It is not heard by the ear, it is felt by the soul. And when men build again, towers, empires, and cities of light, The song weaves through their stone foundations like roots through soil.
It does not judge.
It simply remembers. It waits. And when they are weary of their own noise, when their machines tire and their hands still, it will rise again, quiet as ever, whispering the same old truth. You were made from silence. The sea knows it. The mountains hum it in sleep. Even the moon, pale, patient, mirrors it as she drifts through the night. The song needs no name. Yet every culture that came after gave it one. Some called it the breath of dawn, some the pulse of the deep, others the listener's hymn, but the stars, who had seen all things, called it simply rest. And so the song went on, endless, tireless, perfect in its imperfection. Sometimes bright, sometimes dim, sometimes hidden behind the chaos of human hands. But it never ceased.
It never could.
Because the watcher had not died. He had returned to what he always was, it's a thought in the mind of the divine. And from that place beyond beginning and end, his light moved through all things unseen. When a child laughed for the first time, that was him. When a dying man smiled at the memory of home, that was him. When the sea grew still after the storm, and the sky opened in quiet forgiveness, that was him. He was not worshipped, for he did not want worship. He was remembered, which is greater. And so the story that began with giants and thrones, with floods and falls, with silence and song, ended not in fire, but in listening. The world breathed as one. The divine voice, the one that first called all things from nothing, spoke once more into that harmony. Now you understand. And creation, without word or motion, answered back. We remember. The horizon glowed brighter. The rivers glittered. The stars trembled in their peace. And deep within every living soul, the watcher's song lingered, soft, slow, eternal. For there are melodies that do not belong to sound, and prayers that do not belong to tongues. There are thrones that crumble and stones that sleep. But memory, true memory, never ends. It only changes form. And somewhere between a heartbeat and a sunrise, between the hush of earth and the whisper of sky, the song of the watcher, the song that made silence holy, I still play. There is a tenderness in fading that only the oldest lights understand. To dim is not to die. It is to return what was borrowed, to give back the breath one has carried too long. The watcher's light had become the dawn itself, his song the quiet rhythm of all living things. Ages passed, and the world grew around him. Cities rose where rivers once sang. Temples turned to dust. Languages were born and buried again. But the pulse beneath it all remained steady, like the soft heartbeat of the sleeping earth. Every morning the horizon glowed faintly before the sun touched it, and in that glow the watcher lived, unseen, unnamed, but near. He did not speak anymore. He did not need to. His silence had become the language of God. But time, even when measured by eternity, moves toward surrender. And one morning, the dawn came later than it should have. The sea was still. The stars lingered too long.
And the horizon, that sacred threshold where heaven and earth met to exchange breath, pulsed slower, as though tired.
The watcher felt it, the great stilling. He knew what it was, not ending, but fulfillment. The light that had carried him through eons was completing its circle. He whispered into the hush. So this is how even light learns to sleep. The wind stirred, its voice familiar, ageless. The same voice that had guided him through fire, through flood, through silence and dawn. You have burned long enough. Let the glow return to its source.
I thought I was the source, the watcher said softly. No, the voice replied, tender and vast.
You were the reflection, the mirror of what was always within me. Now that the world remembers, you can rest. He closed his eyes. The sea reflected the sky perfectly, as though the world had turned into one great mirror. heaven looking into itself. The colors around him softened into pale silver, the hue of final peace. In that moment, he saw everything as it truly was, the stars, scattered embers, but the eyes of mercy. The mountains, not bones of the fallen, but the ribs of prayer. The sea, not a grave, but a cradle. And men, fragile, wandering, luminous, carrying fragments of the same divine spark that once lit the giants, the angels, and himself. He smiled, his light trembling faintly. Then it was never about me. The wind moved through him, dissolving the edges of his glow. It never is. He began to fade, but it was not lost. It was returned. The light within him grew softer, thinner, a golden breath dissolving into the horizon. The sea below whispered his name one last time. The mountains echoed it. The stars flickered in gentle farewell.
Even the silence, that first companion of creation, hummed with love.
He thought of the first dawn he had ever seen. The fire above the waters, the birth of song, the trembling of beauty too immense to name. He thought of the fall, of the sorrow of rebellion, of the first cry that shattered peace. He thought of the boy whose blood whispered light back into the clay,
of the rivers that glowed, of the sea that spoke, of the stars that learned to rest.
Every story, every sorrow was a thread in the same tapestry.
And now it was whole.
He whispered, "What becomes of me when the light is gone?" The voice answered, "You will not be gone. You will be what remains when all else fade, a stillness before the next word." He breathed out, though he no longer needed breath. "Then I am content." The horizon glowed brighter one last time, not in fire, but in grace. The colors of all dawns mingled there, gold, rose, blue, violet, and at their center, a whiteness so pure it was neither light nor absence, but something between. From that brightness came a single whisper, soft enough to be mistaken for wind. "The listener has returned home." And then the horizon dimmed, the sea exhaled, the stars blinked once as though bowing, but in that dimness there was no grief, only rest. For when a candle gives its flame to another, its own light does not die. It continues in the one who now carries it. And so the watcher's glow lived on, in the eyes of those who sought truth softly, in the hearts of those who prayed without sound, in the souls who found holiness in silence. Even now, when the dawn rises and the world stirs from sleep, there is a moment, brief and weightless, when the horizon seems to shimmer with a memory that has no name. That is him.
Not watching, not guarding,
Simply being. And if you wake early enough, before the first bird calls, before the wind finds its breath, and you stand in that tender light, you might hear it too, a whisper, quiet as the turning of time. All light must fade, so it can shine again. Then the sun will rise, the world will move, and you will forget, as all must forget, for forgetting is part of living. But somewhere within you the echo will remain, and when you close your eyes at night, that same whisper will wait beneath your breath. The memory of the watcher, the song of the still horizon, the heartbeat of a universe that has learned how to rest. And thus the light watched itself fade, not into darkness, but into peace. The end was never an ending. It was only a deep breath before another dawn. And if the silence never broke, would your faith still rise in the dark? If the fire never returned, would you still kneel in the ashes? What if the last word God spoke to you was goodbye? And now the world sleeps again. The rivers have quieted, the stars rest upon their thrones, and the sea hums softly beneath the moon. The same song it once whispered to the watcher when the first light faded. If you listen closely, beyond the pulse of your own heart, you can still hear it, the low hymn of creation, remembering itself. Not loud, not urgent, just steady like breath between prayers, Every story you have heard was never about thrones or giants, not truly. It was about remembering the long, slow return of all things to mercy. The stones spoke not to frighten you, but to remind you that even what seems silent holds the name of God inside it. The rivers glowed not to dazzle, but to show that forgiveness moves even through what once drowned. The watcher has gone, but not far. He lingers in the thin light between waking and sleep, where dreams still touch the edges of the eternal. If your heart stills enough, you will find him there. Not in words, but in the warmth that rises when you remember something holy without knowing why. Close your eyes. Breathe as the earth breathes.
Do you feel it?
That faint hum beneath your ribs. Like the sea at rest, like the stars learning again how to sing. That is the Watcher's song. That is the silence of God moving through you. The ancients called it sakana, the peace that descends when the unseen draws near.
It is not fire. It is not a storm.
It is the hush that falls when the divine passes by and the soul bows without needing to speak.
Let that peace settle upon you now.
Let it fill the spaces the noise of the world has worn thin. Let it remind you that you are not alone and never have been, because the story does not end here. It only sleeps until you wake again. The garden beneath the sea still blooms. The stars still hum softly to the rivers. And somewhere, beyond the veil of dawn, the watcher still listens. Not for sound, but for hearts that remember. So rest now, traveller. The light will find you when it is time. And when it does, may you wake not in fear, but in awe, as the stones begin to speak once more.
If you're still here,
perhaps this story was meant for you.